Chapter Roman 39, where the captive relates his life and adventures. My family had its origin in a village in the mountains of Leon, and nature had been kinder and more generous to it than fortune. Though in the general poverty of those communities my father passed for being evening a rich man, and he would have been so in reality had he been as clever in preserving his property as he was in spending it. This tendency of his to be liberal and profuse he had acquired from having been a soldier in his youth, for the soldier's life is a school in which the niggard becomes free-handed and the free-handed prodigal, and if any soldiers are to be found who are misers, they are monsters of rare occurrence. My father went beyond liberality and bordered on prodigality, a disposition by no means advantageous to a married man who has children to succeed to his name and position. My father had three, all sons and all of sufficient age to make choice of a profession. Finding, then, that he was unable to resist his propensity, he resolved to divest himself of the instrument and cause of his prodigality and lavishness, to divest himself of wealth, without which Alexander himself would have seemed parsimonious, and so, calling us all three aside one day into a room, he addressed us in words somewhat to the following effect: "My sons, to assure you that I love you, no more need be known or said than that you are my sons, and to encourage a suspicion that I do not love you, no more is needed than the knowledge that I have no self-control as far as preservation of your patrimony is concerned. Therefore, that you may for the future feel sure that I love you like a father, and have no wish to ruin you like a stepfather, I propose to do with you what I have for some time back meditated, and after mature deliberation decided upon. You are now of an age to choose your line of life, or at least make choice of a calling that will bring you honor and profit when you are older. And what I have resolved to do is to divide my property into 4 parts. 3 I will give to you, to each his portion, without making any difference, and the other I will retain to live upon, and support myself for whatever remainder of life heaven may be pleased to grant me. But I wish each of you, on taking possession of the share that falls to him, to follow one of the paths I shall indicate. In this Spain of ours there is a proverb, to my mind very true, as they all are, being short aphorisms drawn from long practical experience, and the one I refer to says, the church, or the sea, or the king's house, as much as to say, in plainer language, whoever wants to flourish and become rich, let him follow the church, or go to sea, adopting commerce as his calling, or go into the king's service in his household, for they say, better a king's crumb than a lord's favor. I say so because it is my will and pleasure that one of you should follow letters, another trade, and the third serve the king in the wars, for it is a difficult matter to gain admission to his service in his household, and if war does not bring much wealth it confers great distinction and fame. 8 days therefore I will give ye your full shares in money, without defrauding you of a farthing, as you will see in the end. Now tell me if you are willing to follow out my idea and advice as I have laid it before you. Having called upon me as the eldest to answer, I, after urging him not to strip himself of his property but to spend it all as he pleased, for we were young men able to gain our living, consented to comply with his wishes, and said that mine were to follow the profession of arms and by that serve God and my king. My second brother having made the same proposal, decided upon going to the Indies, embarking the portion that fell to him in trade. The youngest, and in my opinion the wisest, said he would rather follow the church, or go to complete his studies at Salamanca. As soon as we had come to an understanding, and made choice of our professions, my father embraced us all, and in the short time he mentioned carried into effect all he had promised, and when he had given to each his share, which as well as I remember was 3,000 ducats, a piece in cash, for an uncle of ours bought the estate and paid for it down, not to let it go out of the family, we all three on the same day took leave of our good father, and at the same time, as it seemed to me inhuman to leave my father with such scanty means in his old age, I induced him to take 2 of my 3,000 ducats, as the remainder would be enough to provide me with all a soldier needed. My 2 brothers, moved by my example, gave him each 1,000 ducats, so that there was left for my father 4,000 ducats in money, besides 3,000, the value of the portion that fell to him which he preferred to retain in land instead of selling it. Finally, as I said, we took leave of him, and of our uncle whom I have mentioned, not without sorrow and tears on both sides, they charging us to let them know whenever an opportunity offered, how we fared, whether well or ill. We promised to do so, and when he had embraced us and given us his blessing, one set out for Salamanca, the other for Seville, and I for Alicante, where I had heard there was a Genoese vessel taking in a cargo of wool for Genoa. It is now some 22 years since I left my father's house, and all that time, though I have written several letters, I have had no news whatever of him or of my brothers. My own adventures during that period I will now relate briefly. I embarked at Alicante, reached Genoa after a prosperous voyage, and proceeded from there to Milan, where I provided myself with arms and a few soldiers' accoutrements. From there it was my intention to go and take service in Piedmont, but as I was already on the road to Alessandria della Paglia, I learned that the great Duke of Alva was on his way to Flanders. I changed my plans, joined him, served under him in the campaigns he made, was present at the deaths of the Counts Egmont and Horn, and was promoted to be ensign under a famous captain of Guadalajara, Diego de Urbina by name. Some time after my arrival in Flanders, news came of the league that His Holiness Pope Pius V of happy memory had made with Venice and Spain against the common enemy, the Turk, who had just then with his fleet taken the famous island of Cyprus, which belonged to the Venetians, a loss deplorable and disastrous. It was known as a fact that the most serene Don John of Austria, natural brother of our good King Don Philip, was coming as commander-in-chief of the Allied forces, and rumors were abroad of the vast warlike preparations which were being made, all which stirred my heart and filled me with a longing to take part in the campaign which was expected, and though I had reason to believe, and almost certain promises, that on the first opportunity that presented itself I should be promoted to be captain, I preferred to leave all and betake myself, as I did, to Italy, and it was my good fortune that Don John had just arrived at Genoa and was going on to Naples to join the Venetian fleet, as he afterwards did at Messina. I may say, in short, that I took part in that glorious expedition, promoted by this time to be a captain of infantry, to which honorable charge my good luck rather than my merits raised me, and that day so fortunate for Christendom, because then all the nations of the earth were disabused of the error under which they lay in imagining the Turks to be invincible on sea. On that day, I say, on which the Ottoman pride and arrogance were broken among all that were there, made happy for the Christians who died that day were happier than those who remained alive and victorious. I alone was miserable, for instead of some naval crown that I may have expected had it been in Roman times, on the night that followed that famous day I found myself with fetters on my feet and manacles on my hands. It happened in this way. El Achali, the king of Algiers, a daring and successful corsair, having attacked and taken the leading Maltese galley, only 3 knights being left alive in it, and they badly wounded, the chief galley of John Andrea, on board of which I and my company were placed, came to its relief, and doing as was bound to do in such a case, I leaped on board the enemy's galley, which, sheering off from that which had attacked it, prevented my men from following me, and so I found myself alone in the midst of my enemies, who were in such numbers that I was unable to resist. In short, I was taken, covered with wounds. Achali, as you know, sirs, made his escape with his entire squadron, and I was left a prisoner in his power, the only sad being among so many, filled with joy, and the only captive among so many free, for there were 15,000 Christians, all at the oar in the Turkish fleet, that regained their longed for liberty that day. They carried me to Constantinople, where the Grand Turk, Selim, made my master general at sea for having done his duty in the battle and carried off as evidence of his bravery the standard of the Order of Malta. The following year, which was the year 72, I found myself at Navarino rowing in the leading galley with the 3 lanterns. There I saw and observed how the opportunity of capturing the whole Turkish fleet in harbor was lost, for all the marines and janissaries that belonged to it made sure that they were about to be attacked inside the very harbor and had their kits and pasamacs, or shoes, ready to flee at once on shore without waiting to be assailed. In so great fear did they stand of our fleet. But heaven ordered it otherwise, not for any fault or neglect of the general who commanded on our side, but for the sins of Christendom, and because it was God's will and pleasure that we should always have instruments of punishment to chastise us. As it was, Achali took refuge at Madan, which is an island near Navarino, and landing forces fortified the mouth of the harbor and waited quietly until Don John retired. On this expedition was taken the galley called the Prize, whose captain was a son of the famous corsair Barbarossa. It was taken by the chief Neapolitan galley called the She-Wolf, commanded by that thunderbolt of war, that father of his men, that successful and unconquered Captain Don Alvaro de Bazan, Marquis of Santa Cruz, and I cannot help telling you what took place at the capture of the prize. The son of Barbarossa was so cruel, and treated his slaves so badly, that, when those who were at the oars saw that the She-Wolf galley was bearing down upon them and gaining upon them, they all at once dropped their oars and seized their captain, who stood on the stage at the end of the gangway, shouting to them to row lustily, and passing him on from bench to bench, from the poop to the prow, they so bit him that before he had got much past the mast his soul had already got to hell. So great, as I said, was the cruelty with which he treated them, and the hatred with which they hated him. We returned to Constantinople, and the following year, 73, it became known that Don John had seized Tunis and taken the kingdom from the Turks and placed Muley Hamet in possession, putting an end to the hopes which Muley Hamida, the cruelest and bravest Moor in the world, entertained of returning to reign there. The Grand Turk took the loss greatly to heart, and with the cunning which all his race possess, he made peace with the Venetians, who were much more eager for it than he was, and the following year, 74, he attacked the Goletta and the fort which Don John had left half built near Tunis. While all these events were occurring, I was laboring at the oar without any hope of freedom. At least I had no hope of obtaining it by ransom, for I was firmly resolved not to write to my father telling him of my misfortunes. At length the Goletta fell, and the fort fell, before which places there were 75,000 regular Turkish soldiers, and more than 400,000 Moors and Arabs from all parts of Africa, and in the train of all this great host such munitions and engines of war, and so many pioneers that with their hands they may have covered the Goletta and the fort with handfuls of earth. The first to fall was the Goletta, until then reckoned impregnable, and it fell, not by any fault of its defenders, who did all that they could and should have done, but because experiment proved how easily entrenchments could be made in the desert sand there, for water used to be found at 2 palms depth, while the Turks found none at 2 yards. And so by means of a quantity of sandbags, they raised their works so high that they commanded the walls of the fort, sweeping them as if from a cavalier, so that no one was able to make a stand or maintain the defense. It was a common opinion that our men should not have shut themselves up in the Goletta, but should have waited in the open at the landing place. But those who say so talk at random and with little knowledge of such matters, for if in the Goletta and in the fort there were barely 7,000 soldiers, how could such a small number, however resolute, sally out and hold their own against numbers like those of the enemy? And how is it possible to help losing a stronghold that is not relieved, above all, when surrounded by a host of determined enemies in their own country? But many thought, and I thought so too, that it was special favor and mercy which heaven showed to Spain in permitting the destruction of that source and hiding place of mischief, that devourer, sponge, and moth of countless money, fruitlessly wasted there to no other purpose save preserving the memory of its capture by the invincible Charles V, as if to make that eternal, as it is and will be. These stones were needed to support it. The fort also fell, but the Turks had to win it inch by inch, for the soldiers who defended it fought so gallantly and stoutly that the number of the enemy killed in 22 general assaults exceeded 25,000. Of 300 that remained alive not one was taken unwounded, a clear and manifest proof of their gallantry and resolution, and how sturdily they had defended themselves and held their post. A small fort or tower which was in the middle of the lagoon under the command of Don Juan Zanagra, a Valencian gentleman and a famous soldier, capitulated upon terms. They took prisoner Don Pedro Puertoguerrero, commandant of the Goleta, who had done all in his power to defend his fortress, and took the loss of it so much to heart that he died of grief on the way to Constantinople, where they were carrying him a prisoner. They also took the commandant of the fort, Gabrio Serbalin, by name, a Milanese gentleman, a great engineer and a very brave soldier. In these two fortresses perished many persons of note, among whom was Pagano Doria, knight of the Order of St. John, a man of generous disposition, as was shown by his extreme liberality to his brother, the famous John Andrea Doria. And what made his death the more sad was that he was slain by some Arabs to whom, seeing that the fort was now lost, he entrusted himself, and who offered to conduct him in the disguise of a Moor to Tabarca, a small fort or station on the coast held by the Genos, employed in the coral fishery. These Arabs cut off his head and carried it to the commander of the Turkish fleet, who proved on them the truth of our Castilian proverb that, though the treason may please, the traitor is hated, for they say he ordered those who brought him the present to be hanged for not having brought him alive. Among the Christians who were taken in the fort was one named Don Pedro de Aguilar, a native of some place, I know not what, in Andalusia, who had been ensign in the fort, a soldier of great repute and rare intelligence, who had in particular a special gift for what they call poetry. I say so because his fate brought him to my galley and to my bench, and made him a slave to the same master. And before we left the port this gentleman composed 2 sonnets by way of epitaphs, one on the Goletta and the other on the fort. Truly, I may as well repeat them, for I have them by heart, and I think they will be liked rather than disliked. Chapter 40, in which the story of the captive is continued. Sonnet. Blessed souls, that, from this mortal husk set free, in guerdon of brave deeds beatified, above this lowly orb of ours abide, made heirs of heaven and immortality, with noble rage and ardor glowing ye, your strength, while strength was yours, in battle plied, and with your own blood and the foeman's died, the sandy soil and the encircling sea. It was the ebbing life-blood first that failed, the weary arms, the stout hearts never quailed. Though vanquished, yet ye earned the victor's crown. Though mourned, yet still triumphant was your fall. For there ye won, between the sword and wall, in heaven glory and on earth renown. That is it exactly, according to my recollection, said the captive. Well then, that on the fort, said the gentleman, if my memory serves me, goes thus. Sonnet, up from this wasted soil, this shattered shell, whose walls and towers here in ruin lie, 3,000 soldier souls took wing on high, in the bright mansions of the blessed to dwell, the onslaught of the foeman to repel. By may of arm all vainly did they try, and when at length it was left them but to die, wearied and few the last defenders fell. And this same arid soil has ever been a haunt of countless mournful memories, as well in our day as in days of yore. But never yet to heaven it sent, I ween, from its hard bosom purer souls than these, or braver bodies on its surface bore. The sonnets were not disliked, and the captive was rejoiced at the tidings they gave him of his comrade, and continuing his tale, he went on to say, the Goletta and the fort being thus in their hands, the Turks gave orders to dismantle the Goletta, for the fort was reduced to such a state that there was nothing left to level, and to do the work more quickly and easily they mined it in 3 places, but nowhere were they able to blow up the part which seemed to be the least strong, that is to say, the old walls, while all that remained standing of the new fortifications that the Fratton had made came to the ground with the greatest ease. Finally, the fleet returned victorious and triumphant to Constantinople, and a few months later died my master, El Achali, otherwise Achali Fardax, which means in Turkish the scabby renegade, for that he was. It is the practice with the Turks to name people from some defect or virtue they may possess, the reason being that there are among them only 4 surnames belonging to families tracing their descent from the Ottoman house, and the others, as I have said, take their names and surnames either from bodily blemishes or moral qualities. This scabby one rode at the oar as a slave of the Grand Seigneurs for 14 years, and when over 34 years of age, in resentment at having been struck by a Turk while at the oar, turned renegade and renounced his faith in order to be able to revenge himself, and such was his valor that, without owing his advancement to the base ways and means by which most favorites of the Grand Seigneur rise to power, he came to be King of Algiers and afterwards General on Sea, which is the 3rd place of trust in the realm. He was a Calabrian by birth, and a worthy man morally, and he treated his slaves with great humanity. He had 3,000 of them, and after his death they were divided, as he directed by his will, between the Grand Seigneur who is heir of all who die and shares with the children of the deceased and his renegades. I fell to the lot of a Venetian renegade who, when a cabin boy on board a ship, had been taken by Achali and was so much beloved by him that he became one of his most favored youths. He came to be the most cruel renegade I ever saw. His name was Hassan Aga, and he grew very rich and became king of Algiers. With him I went there from Constantinople, rather glad to be so near Spain. Not that I intended to write to anyone about my unhappy lot, but to try if fortune would be kinder to me in Algiers than in Constantinople, where I had attempted in 1,000 ways to escape, without ever finding a favorable time or chance. But in Algiers I resolved to seek for other means of effecting the purpose I cherished so dearly, for the hope of obtaining my liberty never deserted me, and when, in my plots and schemes and attempts the result did not answer my expectations, without giving way to despair I immediately began to look out for or conjure up some new hope to support me, however faint or feeble it may be. In this way I lived on immured in a building or prison called by the Turks a bano, in which they confine the Christian captives, as well those that are the king's as those belonging to private individuals, and also what they call those of the almason, which is as much as to say the slaves of the municipality, who serve the city in the public works and other employments. But captives of this kind recover their liberty with great difficulty, for, as they are public property and have no particular master, there is no one with whom to treat for their ransom, even though they may have the means. To these bonos, as I have said, some private individuals of the town are in the habit of bringing their captives, especially when they are to be ransomed, because there they can keep them in safety and comfort until their ransom arrives. The king's captives, also, that are on ransom, do not go out to work with the rest of the crew, unless when their ransom is delayed, for then, to make them right for it more pressingly, they compel them to work and go for wood, which is no light labor. I, however, was one of those on ransom, for when it was discovered that I was a captain, although I declared my scanty means and want of fortune, nothing could dissuade them from including me among the gentlemen and those waiting to be ransomed. They put a chain on me, more as a mark of this than to keep me safe, and so I passed my life in that bano with several other gentlemen and persons of quality marked out as held to ransom. But though at times, or rather almost always, we suffered from hunger and scanty clothing, nothing distressed us so much as hearing and seeing at every turn the unexampled and unheard of cruelties my master inflicted upon the Christians. Every day he hanged a man, impaled one, cut off the ears of another, and all with so little provocation, or so entirely without any, that the Turks acknowledged he did it merely for the sake of doing it, and because he was by nature murderously disposed towards the whole human race. The only one that fared at all well with him was a Spanish soldier, something de Saavedra by name, to whom he never gave a blow himself, or ordered a blow to be given, or addressed a hard word, although he had done things that will dwell in the memory of the people there for many a year, and all to recover his liberty, and for the least of the many things he did we all dreaded that he would be impaled, and he himself was in fear of it more than once, and only that time does not allow. I could tell you now something of what that soldier did that would interest and astonish you much more than the narration of my own tale. To go on with my story, the courtyard of our prison was overlooked by the windows of the house belonging to a wealthy Moor of high position, and these, as is usual in Moorish houses, were rather loopholes than windows, and besides were covered with thick and close lattice work. It so happened, then, that as I was one day on the terrace of our prison with 3 other comrades, trying to pass away the time how far we could leap with our chains, we being alone, for all the other Christians had gone out to work, I chanced to raise my eyes, and from one of these little closed windows I saw a reed appear with a cloth attached to the end of it, and it kept waving to and fro, and moving as if making signs to us to come and take it. We watched it, and one of those who were with me went and stood under the reed to see whether they would let it drop, or what they would do. But as he did so the reed was raised and moved from side to side as if they meant to say no by a shake of the head. The Christian came back, and it was again lowered, making the same movements as before. Another of my comrades went, and with him the same happened as with the first, and then the third went forward, but with the same result as the first and second. Seeing this, I did not like not to try my luck, and as soon as I came under the reed it was dropped and fell inside the bano at my feet. I hastened to untie the cloth, in which I perceived a knot, and in this were 10 cyanes, which are coins of base gold, current among the Moors, and each worth 10 reals of our money. It is needless to say I rejoiced over this godsend, and my joy was not less than my wonder as I strove to imagine how this good fortune could have come to us, but to me specially, for the evident unwillingness to drop the reed for any but me showed that it was for me the favor was intended. I took my welcome money, broke the reed, and returned to the terrace, and looking up at the window, I saw a very white hand put out, that opened and shut very quickly. From this we gathered or fancied that it must be some woman living in that house that had done us this kindness, and to show that we were grateful for it, we made salams after the fashion of the Moors, bowing the head, bending the body, and crossing the arms on the breast. Shortly afterwards at the same window a small cross made of reeds was put out and immediately withdrawn. This sign led us to believe that some Christian woman was a captive in the house, and that it was she who had been so good to us, but the whiteness of the hand and the bracelets we had perceived made us dismiss that idea, though we thought it may be one of the Christian renegades whom their masters very often take as lawful wives, and gladly, for they prefer them to the women of their own nation. In all our conjectures we were wide of the truth, so from that time forward our sole occupation was watching and gazing at the window where the cross had appeared to us as if it were our pole star. But at least 15 days passed without our seeing either it or the hand, or any other sign, and though meanwhile we endeavored, with the utmost pains, to ascertain who it was that lived in the house, and whether there were any Christian renegade in it, nobody could ever tell us anything more than that he who lived there was a rich Mir of high position, Haji Murado by name, formerly Alcalde of La Plata, an office of high dignity among them. But when we least thought it was going to rain any more Sienese from that quarter, we saw the reed suddenly appear with another cloth tied in a larger knot attached to it, and this at a time when, as on the former occasion, the Bono was deserted and unoccupied. We made trial as before, each of the same three going forward before I did. But the reed was delivered to none but me, and on my approach it was let drop. I untied the knot, and I found 40 Spanish gold crowns with a paper written in Arabic, and at the end of the writing there was a large cross drawn. I kissed the cross, took the crowns, and returned to the terrace, and we all made our salams. Again the hand appeared. I made signs that I would read the paper, and then the window was closed. We were all puzzled, though filled with joy at what had taken place, and as none of us understood Arabic, great was our curiosity to know what the paper contained, and still greater the difficulty of finding someone to read it. At last I resolved to confide in a renegade, a native of Murcia, who professed a very great friendship for me, and had given pledges that bound him to keep any secret I may entrust to him, for it is the custom, with some renegades, when they intend to return to Christian territory, to carry about them certificates from captives of mark testifying, in whatever form they can, that such and such a renegade is a worthy man who has always shown kindness to Christians and is anxious to escape on the first opportunity that may present itself. Some obtain these testimonials with good intentions, others put them to a cunning use, for when they go to pillage on Christian territory, if they chance to be cast away or taken prisoners, they produce their certificates and say that from these papers may be seen the object they came for, which was to remain on Christian ground, and that it was to this end they joined the Turks in their foray. In this way they escape the consequences of the first outburst and make their peace with the church before it does them any harm, and then when they have the chance they return to Barbary to become what they were before. Others, however, there are who procure these papers and make use of them honestly, and remain on Christian soil. This friend of mine, then, was one of these renegades that I have described. He had certificates from all our comrades, in which we testified in his favor as strongly as we could, and if the Moors had found the papers, they would have burned him alive. I knew that he understood Arabic very well, and could not only speak but also write it. But before I disclosed the whole matter to him, I asked him to read for me this paper which I had found by accident in a hole in my cell. He opened it and remained some time examining it and muttering to himself as he translated it. I asked him if he understood it, and he told me he did perfectly well, and that if I wished him to tell me its meaning word for word, I must give him pen and ink that he may do it more satisfactorily. We at once gave him what he required, and he set about translating it bit by bit, and when he had done he said, "All that is here in Spanish is what the Moorish paper contains, and you must bear in mind that when it says Lela Marian it means Our Lady the Virgin Mary." We read the paper and it ran thus: "When I was a child my father had a slave who taught me to pray the Christian prayer in my own language, and told me many things about Lela Marian. The Christian died, and I know that she did not go to the fire, but to Allah, because since then I have seen her twice, and she told me to go to the land of the Christians to see Lela Marian, who had great love for me. I know not how to go. I have seen many Christians, but Except thyself none has seemed to me to be a gentleman. I am young and beautiful, and have plenty of money to take with me. See if you can contrive how we may go, and if you will you shall be my husband there, and if you will not it will not distress me, for Lelamarian will find me someone to marry me. I myself have written this, have a care to whom you givest it to read. Trust no more, for they are all perfidious. I am greatly troubled on this account, for I would not of you confide in any one, because if my father knew it he would at once fling me down a well and cover me with stones. I will put a thread to the reed, tie the answer to it, and if you have no one to write for you in Arabic, tell it to me by signs, for Lelamarian will make me understand you. She and Allah and this cross, which I often kiss as the captive bade me, protect you. Judge, sirs, whether we had reason for surprise and joy at the words of this paper, and both one and the other were so great that the renegade perceived that the paper had not been found by chance, but had been in reality addressed to someone of us, and he begged us, if what he suspected were the truth, to trust him and tell him all, for he would risk his life for our freedom. And so saying, he took out from his breast a metal crucifix, and with many tears swore by the God the image represented, in whom, sinful and wicked as he was, he truly and faithfully believed to be loyal to us and keep secret whatever we chose to reveal to him, for he thought and almost foresaw that by means of her who had written that paper, he and all of us would obtain our liberty, and he himself obtain the object he so much desired, his restoration to the bosom of the Holy Mother Church, from which by his own sin and ignorance he was now severed like a corrupt limb. The renegade said this with so many tears and such signs of repentance, that with one consent we all agreed to tell him the whole truth of the matter, and so we gave him a full account of all, without hiding anything from him. We pointed out to him the window at which the reed appeared, and he by that means took note of the house, and resolved to ascertain with particular care who lived in it. We agreed also that it would be advisable to answer the Moorish lady's letter, and the renegade without a moment's delay took down the words I dictated to him, which were exactly what I shall tell you, for nothing of importance that took place in this affair has escaped my memory, or ever will while life lasts. This, then, was the answer returned to the Moorish lady. The true Allah protect you, lady, and that blessed Marian who is the true mother of God, and who has put it into your heart to go to the land of the Christians, because she loves you. Entreat her that she be pleased to show you how you can execute the command she gives you, for she will, such is her goodness. On my own part and on that of all these Christians who are with me, I promise to do all that we can for you, evening to death. Fail not to write to me and inform me what you do, mean to do, and I will always answer you, for the great Allah has given us a Christian captive who can speak and write your language well, as you mayest see by this paper, without fear. Therefore, you can inform us of all you wouldst, as to what you sayest, that if you do reach the land of the Christians you will be my wife. I give you my promise upon it as a good Christian, and know that the Christians keep their promises better than the Moors. Allah and Mary and his mother watch over you, my lady. The paper being written and folded, I waited 2 days until the bano was empty as before, and immediately repaired to the usual walk on the terrace to see if there were any sign of the reed, which was not long in making its appearance. As soon as I saw it, although I could not distinguish who put it out, I showed the paper as a sign to attach the thread, but it was already fixed to the reed, and to it I tied the paper. And shortly afterwards our star once more made its appearance with the white flag of peace, the little bundle. It was dropped, and I picked it up and found in the cloth, in gold and silver coins of all sorts, more than 50 crowns, which 50 times more strengthened our joy and doubled our hope of gaining our liberty. That very night our renegade returned and said he had learned that the Moor we had been told of lived in that house, that his name was Haji Morado, that he was enormously rich, that he had one only daughter the heiress of all his wealth, and that it was the general opinion throughout the city that she was the most beautiful woman in Barbary, and that several of the viceroys who came there had sought her for a wife, but that she had been always unwilling to marry, and he had learned, moreover, that she had a Christian slave, who was now dead, all which agreed with the contents of the paper. We immediately took counsel with the renegade as to what means would have to be adopted in order to carry off the Moorish lady and bring us all to Christian territory, and in the end it was agreed that for the present we should wait for a second communication from Zoraida, for that was the name of her who now desires to be called Maria, because we saw clearly that she and no one else could find a way out of all these difficulties. When we had decided upon this, the renegade told us not to be uneasy, for he would lose his life or restore us to liberty. For 4 days the Bano was filled with people, for which reason the reed delayed its appearance for 4 days, but at the end of that time, when the Bano was as it generally was empty, it appeared with the cloth so bulky that it promised a happy birth. Reed and cloth came down to me, and I found another paper and 100 crowns in gold, without any other coin. The renegade was present, and in our cell we gave him the paper to read, which was to this effect: I cannot think of a plan, Senor, for our going to Spain, nor has Lella Marian shown me one, though I have asked her. All that can be done is for me to give you plenty of money in gold from this window. With it ransom yourself and your friends, and let one of you go to the land of the Christians, and there buy a vessel and come back for the others, and he will find me in my father's garden, which is at the Babazon gate near the seashore, where I shall be all this summer with my father and my servants. You can carry me away from there by night without any danger, and bring me to the vessel. And remember, you are to be my husband, else I will pray to Marian to punish you. If you cannot trust anyone to go for the vessel, ransom thyself, and do you go, for I know you will return more surely than any other, as you are a gentleman and a Christian. Endeavor to make thyself acquainted with the garden, and when I see you walking over there I shall know that the Bano is empty, and I will give you abundance of money. Allah protect you, Senor. These were the words and contents of the second paper, and on hearing them, each declared himself willing to be the ransomed one, and promised to go and return with scrupulous good faith, and I too made the same offer. But to all this the renegade objected, saying that he would not on any account consent to one being set free before all went together, as experience had taught him how ill those who have been set free keep promises which they made in captivity, for captives of distinction frequently had recourse to this plan, paying the ransom of one who was to go to Valencia or Majorca with money to enable him to arm a bark and return for the others who had ransomed him, but who never came back, for recovered liberty and the dread of losing it again efface from the memory all the obligations in the world. And to prove the truth of what he said, he told us briefly what had happened to a certain Christian gentleman, almost at that very time, the strangest case that had ever occurred evening there, where astonishing and marvelous things are happening every instant. In short, he ended by saying that what could and ought to be done was to give the money intended for the ransom of one of us Christians to him, so that he may with it buy a vessel there in Algiers, under the pretense of becoming a merchant and trader at Tetuan and along the coast, and when master of the vessel, it would be easy for him to hit on some way of getting us all out of the Bano and putting us on board, especially if the Moorish lady gave, as she said, money enough to ransom all, because once freed it would be the easiest thing in the world for us to embark evening in open day. But the greatest difficulty was that the Moors do not allow any renegade to buy or own any craft, unless it be a large vessel for going on roving expeditions, because they are afraid that anyone who buys a small vessel, especially if he be a Spaniard only, wants it for the purpose of escaping to Christian territory. This, however, he could get over by arranging with a tagger in Moor to go shares with him in the purchase of the vessel and in the profit on the cargo, and under cover of this he could become master of the vessel, in which case he looked upon all the rest as accomplished. But though to me and my comrades it had seemed a better plan to send to Majorca for the vessel, as the Moorish lady suggested, we did not dare to oppose him, fearing that if we did not do as he said he would denounce us, and place us in danger of losing all our lives if he were to disclose our dealings with Zoraida, for whose life we would have all given our own. We therefore resolved to put ourselves in the hands of God and in the renegades, and at the same time an answer was given to Zoraida, telling her that we would do all she recommended, for she had given as good advice as if Lela Marian had delivered it, and that it depended on her alone whether we were to defer the business or put it in execution at once. I renewed my promise to be her husband, and thus the next day that the Bono chanced to be empty, she at different times gave us by means of the reed and cloth 2,000 gold crowns and a paper in which she said that the next Juma, that is to say Friday, she was going to her father's garden, but that before she went she would give us more money, and if it were not enough we were to let her know, as she would give us as much as we asked, for her father had so much he would not miss it, and besides she kept all the keys. We at once gave the renegade 500 crowns to buy the vessel, and with 800 I ransomed myself, giving the money to a Valencian merchant who happened to be in Algiers at the time, and who had me released on his word, pledging it that on the arrival of the first ship from Valencia he would pay my ransom, for if he had given the money at once it would have made the king suspect that my ransom money had been for a long time in Algiers, and that the merchant had for his own advantage kept it secret. In fact, my master was so difficult to deal with that I dared not on any account pay down the money at once. The Thursday before the Friday on which the fair Zoraida was to go to the garden she gave us 1,000 crowns more, and warned us of her departure, begging me, if I were ransomed, to find out her father's garden at once, and by all means to seek an opportunity of going there to see her. I answered in a few words that I would do so, and that she must remember to commend us to Lela Marian with all the prayers the captive had taught her. Chapter Roman 41, in which the captive still continues his adventures. Before 15 days were over, our renegade had already purchased an excellent vessel with room for more than 30 persons, and to make the transaction safe and lend a color to it, he thought it well to make, as he did, a voyage to a place called Shershel, 20 leagues from Algiers, on the Oran side, where there is an extensive trade in dried figs. 2 or 3 times he made this voyage in company with the Tagarin already mentioned. The Moors of Aragon are called Tagarins in Barbary, and those of Granada Mudijars, but in the kingdom of Fez they call them Mudijars, Elches, and they are the people the king chiefly employs in war. To proceed, every time he passed with his vessel he anchored in a cove that was not 2 crossbow shots from the garden where Zoraida was waiting, and there the renegade, together with the 2 Moorish lads that rowed, used purposely to station himself, either going through his prayers or else practicing as a part what he meant to perform in earnest. And thus he would go to Zoraida's garden and ask for fruit, which her father gave him, not knowing him, but though, as he afterwards told me, he sought to speak to Zoraida and tell her who he was, and that by my orders he was to take her to the land of the Christians, so that she may feel satisfied and easy. He had never been able to do so, for the Moorish women do not allow themselves to be seen by any Moor or Turk, unless their husband or father bid them. With Christian captives they permit freedom of intercourse and communication, evening more than may be considered proper. But for my part I should have been sorry if he had spoken to her, for perhaps it may have alarmed her to find her affairs talked of by renegades. But God, who ordered it otherwise, afforded no opportunity for our renegade's well-meant purpose, and he, seeing how safely he could go to Churchill and return, and anchor when and how and where he liked, and that the tagger in his partner had no will but his, and that, now I was ransomed, all we wanted was to find some Christians to row, told me to look out for any I should be willing to take with me, over and above those who had been ransomed, and to engage them for the next Friday, which he fixed upon for our departure. On this I spoke to 12 Spaniards, all stout rowers, and such as could most easily leave the city. But it was no easy matter to find so many just then, because there were 20 ships out on a cruise, and they had taken all the rowers with them, and these would not have been found were it not that their master remained at home that summer without going to sea in order to finish a galliot that he had upon the stocks. To these men I said nothing more than that the next Friday in the evening they were to come out stealthily one by one and hang about Haji Morato's garden, waiting for me there until I came. These directions I gave each one separately, with orders that if they saw any other Christians there they were not to say anything to them except that I had directed them to wait at that spot. This preliminary having been settled, another still more necessary step had to be taken, which was to let Zoraida know how matters stood, that she may be prepared and forewarned so as not to be taken by surprise if we were suddenly to seize upon her before she thought the Christian's vessel could have returned. I determined, therefore, to go to the garden and try if I could speak to her, and the day before my departure I went there, under the pretense of gathering herbs. The first person I met was her father, who addressed me in the language that all over Barbary and evening in Constantinople is the medium between captives and Moors, and is neither Morisco nor Castilian, nor of any other nation, but a mixture of all languages, by means of which we can all understand one another. In this sort of language, I say, he asked me what I wanted in his garden, and to whom I belonged. I replied that I was a slave of the Arnott Mami, for I knew as a certainty that he was a very great friend of his, and that I wanted some herbs to make a salad. He asked me then whether I were on ransom or not, and what my master demanded for me. While these questions and answers were proceeding, the fair Zoraida, who had already perceived me some time before, came out of the house in the garden, and, as Moorish women are by no means particular about letting themselves be seen by Christians, or, as I have said before, at all coy, she had no hesitation in coming to where her father stood with me. Moreover, her father, seeing her approaching slowly, called to her to come. It would be beyond my power now to describe to you the great beauty, the high-bred air, the brilliant attire of my beloved Zoraida as she presented herself before my eyes. I will content myself with saying that more pearls hung from her fair neck, her ears, and her hair than she had hairs on her head. On her ankles, which as is customary were bare, she had carcages, for so bracelets or anklets are called in Morisco, of the purest gold, set with so many diamonds that she told me afterwards her father valued them at 10,000 doubloons, and those she had on her wrists were worth as much more. The pearls were in profusion, and very fine, for the highest display and adornment of the Moorish women is decking themselves with rich pearls and seed pearls, and of these there are therefore more among the Moors than among any other people. Zoraida's father had to the reputation of possessing a great number, and the purest in all Algiers, and of possessing also more than 200,000 Spanish crowns, and she, who is now mistress of me only, was mistress of all this. Whether thus adorned she would have been beautiful or not, and what she must have been in her prosperity, may be imagined from the beauty remaining to her after so many hardships, for, as everyone knows, the beauty of some women has its times and its seasons, and is increased or diminished by chance causes, and naturally the emotions of the mind will heighten or impair it, though truly more frequently they totally destroy it. In a word, she presented herself before me that day attired with the utmost splendor, and supremely beautiful. At any rate, she seemed to me the most beautiful object I had ever seen, and when, besides, I thought of all I owed to her, I felt as though I had before me some heavenly being come to earth to bring me relief and happiness. As she approached, her father told her in his own language that I was a captive belonging to his friend the Arnott Mommy, and that I had come for salad. She took up the conversation, and in that mixture of tongues I have spoken of, she asked me if I was a gentleman, and why I was not ransomed. I answered that I was already ransomed, and that by the price it may be seen what value my master set on me, as I had given 1,500 sultanis for me. To which she replied, hadst you been my father's, I can tell you, I would not have let him part with you for twice as much, for you Christians always tell lies about yourselves, and make yourselves out poor to cheat the Moors. That may be, lady, said I, but truly I dealt truthfully with my master, as I do and mean to do with everybody in the world. And when do you go? Said Zoraida. To-morrow, I think, said I, for there is a vessel here from France, which sails to-morrow, and I think I shall go in her. Would it not be better, said Zoraida, to wait for the arrival of ships from Spain and go with them, and not with the French who are not your friends? No, said I, though if there were intelligence that a vessel were now coming from Spain, it is true I may, perhaps, wait for it. However, it is more likely I shall depart to-morrow, for the longing I feel to return to my country and to those I love is so great that it will not allow me to wait for another opportunity, however more convenient, if it be delayed. No doubt you are married in yours own country, said Zoraida, and for that reason you are anxious to go and see your wife. I am not married, I replied, but I have given my promise to marry on my arrival there. And is the lady beautiful to whom you have given it? Said Zoraida. So beautiful, said I, that, to describe her worthily and tell you the truth, she is very like you. At this her father laughed very heartily and said, by Allah, Christian, she must be very beautiful if she is like my daughter, who is the most beautiful woman in all this kingdom. Only look at her well and you will see I am telling the truth. Zoraida's father, as the better linguist, helped to interpret most of these words and phrases, for though she spoke the bastard language that, as I have said, is employed there, she expressed her meaning more by signs than by words. While we were still engaged in this conversation, a Moor came running up, exclaiming that 4 Turks had leaped over the fence or wall of the garden, and were gathering the fruit though it was not yet ripe. The old man was alarmed, and Zoraida too, for the Moors commonly, and so to speak, instinctively have a dread of the Turks, but particularly of the soldiers, who are so insolent and domineering to the Moors who are under their power that they treat them worse than if they were their slaves. Her father said to Zoraida, daughter, retire into the house, and shut thyself in while I go and speak to these dogs, and you, Christian, pick your herbs and go in peace, and Allah bring you safe to your own country. I bowed, and he went away to look for the Turks, leaving me alone with Zoraida, who made as if she were about to retire as her father bade her. But the moment he was concealed by the trees of the garden, turning to me with her eyes full of tears, she said, Tamji, Cristiano, Tamji, that is to say, are you going? Christian, are you going? I made answer, yes, lady, but not without you. Come what may, be on the watch for me on the next Juma, and be not alarmed when you seest us, for most surely we shall go to the land of the Christians. This I said in such a way that she understood perfectly all that passed between us, and throwing her arm round my neck, she began with feeble steps to move towards the house. But as fate would have it, and it may have been very unfortunate if heaven had not otherwise ordered it, just as we were moving on in the manner and position I have described, with her arm round my neck, her father, as he returned after having sent away the Turks, saw how we were walking, and we perceived that he saw us. But Zoraida ready and quick-witted, took care not to remove her arm from my neck, but on the contrary drew closer to me and laid her head on my breast, bending her knees a little and showing all the signs and tokens of fainting, while I at the same time made it seem as though I were supporting her against my will. Her father came running up to where we were, and seeing his daughter in this state asked what was the matter with her. She, however, giving no answer, he said, "No doubt she has fainted in alarm at the entrance of those dogs," and taking her from mine, he drew her to his own breast, while she sighing, her eyes still wet with tears, said again, "AMG, Cristiano, AMG, go, Christian, go." To this her father replied, "There is no need, daughter, for the Christian to go, for he has done you no harm, and the Turks have now gone. Feel no alarm. There is nothing to hurt you, for as I say, the Turks at my request have gone back the way they came. It was they who terrified her, as you have said, Senor," said I to her father, "but since she tells me to go, I have no wish to displease her. Peace be with you, and with your leave I will come back to this garden for herbs if need be, for my master says there are nowhere better herbs for salad than here. Come back for any you have need of," replied Haji Murado, "for my daughter does not speak thus because she is displeased with you or any Christian. She only meant that the Turks should go, not you, or that it was time for you to look for your herbs." With this I at once took my leave of both, and she, looking as though her heart were breaking, retired with her father. While pretending to look for herbs, I made the round of the garden at my ease and studied carefully all the approaches and outlets and the fastenings of the house, and everything that could be taken advantage of to make our task easy. Having done so, I went and gave an account of all that had taken place to the renegade and my comrades, and looked forward with impatience to the hour when, all fear at an end, I should find myself in possession of the prize which fortune held out to me in the fair and lovely Zoraida. The time passed at length, and the appointed day we so longed for arrived, and all following out the arrangement and plan which, after careful consideration and many a long discussion, we had decided upon, we succeeded as fully as we could have wished, for on the Friday following, the day upon which I spoke to Zoraida in the garden, the renegade anchored his vessel at nightfall almost opposite the spot where she was. The Christians who were to row were ready and in hiding in different places round about, all waiting for me, anxious and elated and eager to attack the vessel they had before their eyes, for they did not know the renegade's plan, but expected that they were to gain their liberty by force of arms and by killing the Moors who were on board the vessel. As soon, then, as I and my comrades made our appearance, all those that were in hiding seeing us came and joined us. It was now the time when the city gates are shut, and there was no one to be seen in all the space outside. When we were collected together, we debated whether it would be better first to go for Zoraida, or to make prisoners of the Moorish rowers who rowed in the vessel. But while we were still uncertain, our renegade came up asking us what kept us, as it was now the time, and all the Moors were off their guard and most of them asleep. We told him why we hesitated, but he said it was of more importance first to secure the vessel, which could be done with the greatest ease and without any danger, and then we could go for Zoraida. We all approved of what he said, and so without further delay, guided by him, we made for the vessel, and he leaping on board first, drew his cutlass and said in Morisco, "Let no one stir from this if he does not want it to cost him his life." By this almost all the Christians were on board, and the Moors, who were faint-hearted, hearing their captain speak in this way, were cowed, and without any one of them taking to his arms, and truly they had few or hardly any, they submitted, without saying a word, to be bound by the Christians, who quickly secured them, threatening them that if they raised any kind of outcry they would be all put to the sword. This having been accomplished, and half of our party being left to keep guard over them, the rest of us, again taking the renegade as our guide, hastened towards Haji Murado's garden, and as good luck would have it, On trying the gate, it opened as easily as if it had not been locked, and so, quite quietly and in silence, we reached the house without being perceived by anybody. The lovely Zoraida was watching for us at a window, and as soon as she perceived that there were people there, she asked in a low voice if we were Nizarani, as much as to say, or ask if we were Christians. I answered that we were, and begged her to come down. As soon as she recognized me, she did not delay an instant, but, without answering a word, came down immediately, opened the door, and presented herself before us all, so beautiful and so richly attired that I cannot attempt to describe her. The moment I saw her, I took her hand and kissed it, and the renegade and my two comrades did the same, and the rest, who knew nothing of the circumstances, did as they saw us do, for it only seemed as if we were returning thanks to her, and recognizing her as the giver of our liberty. The renegade asked her in the Morisco language if her father was in the house. She replied that he was and that he was asleep. Then it will be necessary to waken him and take him with us, said the renegade, and everything of value in this fair mansion. No, said she, my father must not on any account be touched, and there is nothing in the house except what I shall take, and that will be quite enough to enrich and satisfy all of you. Wait a little and you shall see. And so saying, she went in, telling us she would return immediately, and bidding us keep quiet, making any noise. I asked the renegade what had passed between them, and when he told me, I declared that nothing should be done except in accordance with the wishes of Zoraida, who now came back with a little trunk so full of gold crowns that she could scarcely carry it. Unfortunately, her father awoke while this was going on, and hearing a noise in the garden, came to the window, and at once perceiving that all those who were there were Christians, raising a prodigiously loud outcry, he began to call out in Arabic, Christians, Christians, thieves, thieves, by which cries we were all thrown into the greatest fear and embarrassment. But the renegade, seeing the danger we were in and how important it was for him to effect his purpose before we were heard, mounted with the utmost quickness to where Haji Morado was, and with him went some of our party. I, however, did not dare to leave Zoraida, who had fallen almost fainting in my arms. To be brief, those who had gone upstairs acted so promptly that in an instant they came down, carrying Haji Morado with his hands bound and a napkin tied over his mouth, which prevented him from uttering a word, warning him at the same time that to attempt to speak would cost him his life. When his daughter caught sight of him, she covered her eyes so as not to see him, and her father was horror-stricken, not knowing how willingly she had placed herself in our hands. But it was now most essential for us to be on the move, and carefully and quickly we regained the vessel, where those who had remained on board were waiting for us in apprehension of some mishap having befallen us. It was barely 2 hours after night set in when we were all on board the vessel, where the cords were removed from the hands of Zoraida's father and the napkin from his mouth. But the renegade once more told him not to utter a word, or they would take his life. He, when he saw his daughter there, began to sigh piteously, and still more when he perceived that I held her closely embraced, and that she lay quiet without resisting or complaining, or showing any reluctance. Nevertheless, he remained silent lest they should carry into effect the repeated threats the renegade had addressed to him. Finding herself now on board, and that we were about to give way with the oars, Zoraida, seeing her father there and the other Moors bound, bade the renegade ask me to do her the favor of releasing the Moors and setting her father at liberty, for she would rather drown herself in the sea than suffer a father that had loved her so dearly to be carried away captive before her eyes and on her account. The renegade repeated this to me, and I replied that I was very willing to do so, but he replied that it was not advisable, because if they were left there they would at once raise the country and stir up the city, and lead to the dispatch of swift cruisers in pursuit, and our being taken by sea or land without any possibility of escape, and that all that could be done was to set them free on the first Christian ground we reached. On this point we all agreed, and Zoraida, to whom it was explained, together with the reasons that prevented us from doing at once what she desired, was satisfied, likewise, and then in glad silence and with cheerful alacrity each of our stout rowers took his oar, and commending ourselves to God with all our hearts, we began to shape our course for the island of Majorca, the nearest Christian land. Owing, however, to the Tramontana rising a little, and the sea growing somewhat rough, it was impossible for us to keep a straight course for Majorca, and we were compelled to coast in the direction of Oran, not without great uneasiness on our part lest we should be observed from the town of Scherschel, which lies on that coast, not more than 60 miles from Algiers. Moreover, we were afraid of meeting on that course one of the galleots that usually come with goods from Tetuan, although each of us for himself and all of us together felt confident that, if we were to meet a merchant galliot, so that it were not a cruiser, not only should we not be lost, but that we should take a vessel in which we could more safely accomplish our voyage. As we pursued our course, Zoraida kept her head between my hands so as not to see her father, and I felt that she was praying to Lelamarian to help us. We may have made about 30 miles when daybreak found us some 3 musket shots off the land, which seemed to us deserted and without anyone to see us. For all that, however, by hard rowing we put out a little to sea, for it was now somewhat calmer, and having gained about 2 leagues the word was given to row by batches, while we ate something, for the vessel was well provided, but the rowers said it was not a time to take any rest. Let food be served out to those who are not rowing, but they would not leave their oars on any account. This was done, but now a stiff breeze began to blow, which obliged us to leave off rowing, and make sail at once and steer for Oran, as it was impossible to make any other course. All this was done very promptly, and under sail we ran more than 8 miles an hour without any fear, except that of coming across some vessel out on a roving expedition. We gave the Moorish rowers some food, and the renegade comforted them by telling them that they were not held as captives, as we should set them free on the first opportunity. The same was said to Zoraida's father, who replied, "Anything else, Christian, I may hope for or think likely from your generosity and good behavior, but do not think me so simple as to imagine you will give me my liberty, for you would have never exposed yourselves to the danger of depriving me of it only to restore it to me so generously, especially as you know who I am and the sum you may expect to receive on restoring it. And if you will only name that, I here offer you all you require for myself and for my unhappy daughter there, or else for her alone, for she is the greatest and most precious part of my soul." As he said this he began to weep so bitterly that he filled us all with compassion and forced Zoraida to look at him, and when she saw him weeping she was so moved that she rose from my feet and ran to throw her arms round him, and pressing her face to his, they both gave way to such an outburst of tears that several of us were constrained to keep them company. But when her father saw her in full dress, and with all her jewels about her, he said to her in his own language, "What means this, my daughter? Last night, before this terrible misfortune in which we are plunged befell us, I saw you in your everyday and indoor garments, and now, without having had time to attire thyself, and without my bringing you any joyful tidings to furnish an occasion for adorning and bedecking thyself, I see you arrayed in the finest attire it would be in my power to give you when fortune was most kind to us. Answer me this, for it causes me greater anxiety and surprise than even this misfortune itself." The renegade interpreted to us what the Moor said to his daughter. She, however, returned him no answer. But when he observed in one corner of the vessel the little trunk in which she used to keep her jewels, which he well knew he had left in Algiers and had not brought to the garden, he was still more amazed, and asked her how that trunk had come into our hands and what there was in it, to which the renegade, without waiting for Zoraida to reply, made answer, "Do not trouble thyself by asking your daughter Zoraida so many questions, sinner, for the one answer I will give. You will serve for all. I would have you know that she is a Christian, and that it is she who has been the file for our chains and our deliverer from captivity. She is here of her own free will, as glad, I imagine, to find herself in this position as he who escapes from darkness into the light, from death to life, and from suffering to glory. Daughter, is this true, what he says?" Cried the Moor. "It is," replied Zoraida. "That you are in truth a Christian," said the old man, "and that you have given your father into the power of his enemies." To which Zoraida made answer, "A Christian I am, but it is not I who have placed you in this position, for it never was my wish to leave you or do you harm, but only to do good to myself." "And what good have you done thyself, daughter?" said he. "Ask you that," said she, "of Lella Marian, for she can tell you better than I." The Moor had hardly heard these words, when with marvelous quickness he flung himself head foremost into the sea, where no doubt he would have been drowned had not the long and full dress he wore held him up for a little on the surface of the water. Zoraida cried aloud to us to save him, and we all hastened to help, and seizing him by his robe we drew him in half drowned and insensible, at which Zoraida was in such distress that she wept over him as piteously and bitterly as though he were already dead. We turned him upon his face, and he voided a great quantity of water, and at the end of 2 hours came to himself. Meanwhile, the wind having changed, we were compelled to head for the land and ply our oars to avoid being driven on shore, but it was our good fortune to reach a creek that lies on one side of a small promontory or cape, called by the Moors that of the Cava Rumio, which in our language means the wicked Christian woman, for it is a tradition among them that La Cava, through whom Spain was lost, lies buried at that spot, Cava, in their language meaning wicked woman, and Rumia Christian. Moreover, they count it unlucky to anchor there when necessity compels them, and they never do so otherwise. For us, however, it was not the resting place of the wicked woman, but a haven of safety for our relief. So much had the sea now got up, we posted a lookout on shore, and never let the oars out of our hands, and ate of the stores the renegade had laid in, imploring God and Our Lady with all our hearts to help and protect us, that we may give a happy ending to a beginning so prosperous. At the entreaty of Zoraida, orders were given to set on shore her father and the other Moors who were still bound, for she could not endure, nor could her tender heart bear to see her father in bonds and her fellow countrymen prisoners before her eyes. We promised her to do this at the moment of departure, for as it was uninhabited we ran no risk in releasing them at that place. Our prayers were not so far in vain as to be unheard by heaven, for after a while the wind changed in our favor and made the sea calm, inviting us once more to resume our voyage with a good heart. Seeing this, we unbound the Moors and one by one put them on shore, at which they were filled with amazement. But when we came to land, Zoraida's father, who had now completely recovered his senses, he said, "Why is it, think ye, Christians, that this wicked woman is rejoiced at your giving me my liberty? Think ye it is because of the affection she bears me? No, truly, it is only because of the hindrance my presence offers to the execution of her base designs. And think not that it is her belief that yours is better than ours that has led her to change her religion. It is only because she knows that immodesty is more freely practiced in your country than in ours." Then turning to Zoraida, while I and another of the Christians held him fast by both arms, lest he should do some mad act, he said to her, "Infamous girl, misguided maiden, where in your blindness and madness are you going in the hands of these dogs, our natural enemies? Cursed be the hour when I begot you. Cursed the luxury and indulgence in which I reared you. But seeing that he was not likely soon to cease, I made haste to put him on shore, and from there he continued his maledictions and lamentations aloud, calling on Mohammed to pray to Allah to destroy us, to confound us, to make an end of us, and when, in consequence of having made sail, we could no longer hear what he said, we could see what he did, how he plucked out his beard and tore his hair and lay writhing on the ground. But once he raised his voice to such a pitch that we were able to hear what he said. Come back, dear daughter, come back to shore, I forgive you all, let those men have the money, for it is theirs now, and come back to comfort your sorrowing father, who will yield up his life on this barren strand if you do leave him. All this Zoraida heard, and heard with sorrow and tears, and all she could say in answer was, Allah grant that Lelamarian, who has made me become a Christian, give you comfort in your sorrow, my father. Allah knows that I could not do otherwise than I have done, and that these Christians owe nothing to my will, for evening had I wished not to accompany them, but remain at home, it would have been impossible for me, so eagerly did my soul urge me on to the accomplishment of this purpose, which I feel to be as righteous as to you, dear father, it seems wicked. But neither could her father hear her nor we see him when she said this. And so, while I consoled Zoraida, we turned our attention to our voyage, in which a breeze from the right point so favored us that we made sure of finding ourselves off the coast of Spain on the tomorrow by daybreak. But, as good seldom or never comes pure and unmixed without being attended or followed by some disturbing evil that gives a shock to it, our fortune, or perhaps the curses which the Moor had hurled at his daughter, for whatever kind of father they may come from, these are always to be dreaded, brought it about that when we were now in a mid-sea, and the night about 3 hours spent, as we were running with all sail set, and oars lashed, for the favoring breeze saved us the trouble of using them, we saw by the light of the moon, which shone brilliantly, a square-rigged vessel in full sail close to us, luffing up and standing across our course, and so close that we had to strike sail to avoid running foul of her, while they too put the helm hard up to let us pass. They came to the side of the ship to ask who we were, where we were bound, and from where we came, but as they asked this in French, our renegade said, let no one answer, for no doubt these are French corsairs who plunder all comers. Acting on this warning, no one answered a word, but after we had gone a little ahead, and the vessel was now lying to leeward, suddenly they fired 2 guns, and apparently both loaded with chain shot, for with one they cut our mast in half and brought down both it and the sail into the sea, and the other, discharged at the same moment, sent a ball into our vessel amidships, staving her in completely, but without doing any further damage. We, however, finding ourselves sinking, began to shout for help and call upon those in the ship to pick us up as we were beginning to fill. They then lay to, and lowering the skiff or boat, as many as a dozen Frenchmen, well armed with matchlocks, and their matches burning, got into it and came alongside, and seeing how few we were, and that our vessel was going down, they took us in, telling us that this had come to us through our incivility in not giving them an answer. Our renegade took the trunk containing Zoraida's wealth and dropped it into the sea without anyone perceiving what he did. In short, we went on board with the Frenchmen who, after having ascertained all they wanted to know about us, rifled us of everything we had, as if they had been our bitterest enemies, and from Zoraida they took even the anklets she wore on her feet. But the distress they caused her did not distress me so much as the fear I was in that from robbing her of her rich and precious jewels they would proceed to rob her of the most precious jewel that she valued more than all. The desires, however, of those people do not go beyond money, but of that their covetousness is insatiable, and on this occasion it was carried to such a pitch that they would have taken even the clothes we wore as captives if they had been worth anything to them. It was the advice of some of them to throw us all into the sea wrapped up in a sail, for their purpose was to trade at some of the ports of Spain, giving themselves out as Bretons, and if they brought us alive they would be punished as soon as the robbery was discovered. But the captain, who was the one who had plundered my beloved Zoraida, said he was satisfied with the prize he had got, and that he would not touch any Spanish port, but pass the Straits of Gibraltar by night, or as best he could, and make for La Rochelle, from which he had sailed. So they agreed by common consent to give us the skiff belonging to their ship and all we required for the short voyage that remained to us, and this they did the next day, on coming in sight of the Spanish coast, with which, and the joy we felt, all our sufferings and miseries were as completely forgotten as if they had never been endured by us. Such is the delight of recovering lost liberty. It may have been about a midday when they placed us in the boat, giving us 2 kegs of water and some biscuit, and the captain, moved by I know not what compassion, as the lovely Zoraida was about to embark, gave her some 40 gold crowns, and would not permit his men to take from her those same garments which she has on now. We got into the boat, returning them thanks for their kindness to us, and showing ourselves grateful rather than indignant. They stood out to sea, steering for the straits. We, without looking to any compass save the land we had before us, set ourselves to row with such energy that by sunset we were so near that we may easily, we thought, land before the night was far advanced. But as the moon did not show that night, and the sky was clouded, and as we knew not whereabouts we were, it did not seem to us a prudent thing to make for the shore, as several of us advised, saying we ought to run ourselves ashore evening if it were on rocks and far from any habitation, for in this way we should be relieved from the apprehensions we naturally felt of the prowling vessels of the Teduan corsairs, who leave Barbary at nightfall, and are on the Spanish coast by daybreak, where they commonly take some prize and then go home to sleep in their own houses. But of the conflicting counsels, the one which was adopted was that we should approach gradually and land where we could if the sea were calm enough to permit us. This was done, and a little before midnight we drew near to the foot of a huge and lofty mountain, not so close to the sea but that it left a narrow space on which to land conveniently. We ran our boat up on the sand, and all sprang out and kissed the ground, and with tears of joyful satisfaction returned thanks to God our Lord for all his incomparable goodness to us on our voyage. We took out of the boat the provisions it contained and drew it up on the shore, and then climbed a long way up the mountain. For evening there we could not feel easy in our hearts, or persuade ourselves that it was Christian soil that was now under our feet. The dawn came more slowly, I think, than we could have wished. We completed the ascent in order to see if from the summit any habitation or any shepherds' huts could be discovered, but strain our eyes as we may, neither dwelling, nor human being, nor path nor road could we perceive. However, we determined to push on farther, as it could not but be that before long we must see someone who could tell us where we were. But what distressed me most was to see Zoraida going on foot over that rough ground, for though I once carried her on my shoulders, she was more wearied by my weariness than rested by the rest, and so she would never again allow me to undergo the exertion, and went on very patiently and cheerfully, while I led her by the hand. We had gone rather less than a quarter of a league when the sound of a little bell fell on our ears, a clear proof that there were flocks hard by, and looking about carefully to see if any were within view, we observed a young shepherd tranquilly and unsuspiciously trimming a stick with his knife at the foot of a cork tree. We called to him, and he, raising his head, sprang nimbly to his feet, for, as we afterwards learned, the first who presented themselves to his sight were the renegade and Zoraida, and seeing them in Moorish dress he imagined that all the Moors of Barbary were upon him, and plunging with marvelous swiftness into the thicket in front of him, he began to raise a prodigious outcry, exclaiming, the Moors have landed! To arms! To arms!" We were all thrown into perplexity by these cries, not knowing what to do. but reflecting that the shouts of the shepherd would raise the country and that the mounted coast guard would come at once to see what was the matter, we agreed that the renegade must strip off his Turkish garments and put on a captive's jacket or coat, which one of our party gave him at once, though he himself was reduced to his shirt, and so commending ourselves to God, we followed the same road which we saw the shepherd take, expecting every moment that the coast guard would be down upon us. Nor did our expectation deceive us, for 2 hours had not passed when, coming out of the brushwood into the open ground, we perceived some 50 mounted men swiftly approaching us at a hand gallop. As soon as we saw them, we stood still, waiting for them. But as they came close and, instead of the Moors they were in quest of, saw a set of poor Christians, they were taken aback, and one of them asked if it could be we who were the cause of the shepherd having raised the call to arms. I said yes, and as I was about to explain to him what had occurred and from where we came and who we were, one of the Christians of our party recognized the horseman who had put the question to us, and before I could say anything more he exclaimed, "Thanks be to God, sirs, for bringing us to such good quarters, for, if I do not deceive myself, the ground we stand on is that of Velas Malaga, unless, truly, all my years of captivity have made me unable to recollect that you, sinner, who ask who we are Pedro de Bustamante, my uncle." The Christian captive had hardly uttered these words when the horseman threw himself off his horse and ran to embrace the young man, crying, "Nephew of my soul and life, I recognize you now, and long have I mourned you as dead, I and my sister, your mother, and all your kin that are still alive, and whom God has been pleased to preserve that they may enjoy the happiness of seeing you. We knew long since that you were in Algiers, and from the appearance of your garments and those of all this company, I conclude that ye have had a miraculous restoration to liberty." "It is true," replied the young man, "and by we will tell you all." As soon as the horsemen understood that we were Christian captives, they dismounted from their horses, and each offered his to carry us to the city of Velas Malaga, which was a league and a half distant. Some of them went to bring the boat to the city, we having told them where we had left it. Others took us up behind them, and Zoraida was placed on the horse of the young man's uncle. The whole town came out to meet us, for they had by this time heard of our arrival from one who had gone on in advance. They were not astonished to see liberated captives or captive Moors, for people on that coast are well used to see both one and the other, but they were astonished at the beauty of Zoraida, which was just then heightened as well by the exertion of traveling as by joy at finding herself on Christian soil, and relieved of all fear of being lost, for this had brought such a glow upon her face, that unless my affection for her were deceiving me, I would venture to say that there was not a more beautiful creature in the world, at least, that I had ever seen. We went straight to the church to return thanks to God for the mercies we had received, and when Zoraida entered it she said there were faces there, like Lella Marian's. We told her they were her images, and as well as he could the renegade explained to her what they meant, that she may adore them as if each of them were the very same Lella Marian that had spoken to her, and she, having great intelligence and a quick and clear instinct, understood at once all he said to her about them. From there they took us away and distributed us all in different houses in the town. But as for the renegade, Zoraida, and myself, the Christian who came with us brought us to the house of his parents, who had a fair share of the gifts of fortune, and treated us with as much kindness as they did their own son. We remained 6 days in Velas, at the end of which the renegade, having informed himself of all that was requisite for him to do, set out for the city of Granada to restore himself to the sacred bosom of the Church through the medium of the Holy Inquisition. The other released captives took their departures, each the way that seemed best to him and Zoraida, and I were left alone, with nothing more than the crowns which the courtesy of the Frenchman had bestowed upon Zoraida, out of which I bought the beast on which she rides, and I for the present attending her, as her father and squire, and not as her husband. We are now going to ascertain if my father is living, or if any of my brothers has had better fortune than mine has been, though, as heaven has made me the companion of Zoraida, I think no other lot could be assigned to me, however happy, that I would rather have. The patience with which she endures the hardships that poverty brings with it, and the eagerness she shows to become a Christian, are such that they fill me with admiration and bind me to serve her all my life, though the happiness I feel in seeing myself, hers, and her mine, is disturbed and marred by not knowing whether I shall find any corner to shelter her in my own country, or whether time and death may not have made such changes in the fortunes and lives of my father and brothers that I shall hardly find anyone who knows me if they are not alive. Chapter Roman 42, which treats of what further took place in the inn, and of several other things worth knowing. With these words the captive held his peace, and Don Fernando said to him, "In truth, Captain, the manner in which you have related this remarkable adventure has been such as befitted the novelty and strangeness of the matter. The whole story is curious and uncommon, and abounds with incidents that fill the hearers with wonder and astonishment, and so great is the pleasure we have found in listening to it that we should be glad if it were to begin again, evening though to tomorrow were to find us still occupied with the same tale." And, while he said this, Cardenio and the rest of them offered to be of service to him in any way that lay in their power, and in words and language so kindly and sincere that the captain was much gratified by their goodwill. In particular, Don Fernando offered, if he would go back with him, to get his brother the Marquis to become godfather at the baptism of Zoraida, and on his own part to provide him with the means of making his appearance in his own country with the credit and comfort he was entitled to. For all this the captive returned thanks very courteously, although he would not accept any of their generous offers. By this time night closed in, and as it did, there came up to the inn a coach attended by some men on horseback, who demanded accommodation, to which the landlady replied that there was not a hand's breadth of the whole inn unoccupied. Still, for all that, said one of those who had entered on horseback, room must be found for his lordship the judge here. At this name the landlady was taken aback, and said, "Senor, the fact is, I have no beds, but if his lordship the judge carries one with him, as no doubt he does, let him come in and welcome, for my husband and I will give up our room to accommodate his worship." "Very good, so be it," said the squire. But in the meantime a man had got out of the coach whose dress indicated at a glance the office and post he held, for the long robe with ruffled sleeves that he wore showed that he was, as his servant said, a judge of appeal. He led by the hand a young girl in a traveling dress, apparently about 16 years of age, and of such a high-bred air, so beautiful and so graceful, that all were filled with admiration when she made her appearance, and but for having seen Dorothea, Lucinda, and Zoraida, who were there in the inn, they would have fancied that a beauty like that of this maiden's would have been hard to find. Don Quixote was present at the entrance of the judge with the young lady, and as soon as he saw him he said, "Your worship may with confidence enter and take your ease in this castle, for though the accommodation be scanty and poor, there are no quarters so cramped or inconvenient that they cannot make room for arms and letters. Above all, if arms and letters have beauty for a guide and leader, as letters, represented by your worship, have in this fair maiden, to whom not only ought castles to throw themselves open and yield themselves up, but rocks should rend themselves asunder and mountains divide and bow themselves down to give her a reception. Enter, your worship, I say, into this paradise, for here you will find stars and suns to accompany the heaven your worship brings with you. Here you will find arms in their supreme excellence, and beauty in its highest perfection. The judge was struck with amazement at the language of Don Quixote, whom he scrutinized very carefully, no less astonished by his figure than by his talk, and before he could find words to answer him he had a fresh surprise when he saw opposite to him Lucinda, Dorothea, and Zoraida, who, having heard of the new guests and of the beauty of the young lady, had come to see her and welcome her. Don Fernando, Cardenio, and the curate, however, greeted him in a more intelligible and polished style. In short, the judge made his entrance in a state of bewilderment as well with what he saw as what he heard, and the fair ladies of the inn gave the fair damsel a cordial welcome. On the whole, he could perceive that all who were there were people of quality, but with the figure, countenance, and bearing of Don Quixote he was at his wits' end, and all civilities having been exchanged, and the accommodation of the inn inquired into, it was settled, as it had been before settled, that all the women should retire to the garret that has been already mentioned, and that the men should remain outside as if to guard them. The judge, therefore, was very well pleased to allow his daughter, for such the damsel was, to go with the ladies, which she did very willingly, and with part of the host's narrow bed and half of what the judge had brought with him, they made a more comfortable arrangement for the night than they had expected. The captive, whose heart had leaped within him the instant he saw the judge, telling him somehow that this was his brother, asked one of the servants who accompanied him what his name was, and whether he knew from what part of the country he came. The servant replied that he was called the licentiate Juan Perez de Viedma, and that he had heard it said he came from a village in the mountains of Levan. From this statement and what he himself had seen, he felt convinced that this was his brother who had adopted letters by his father's advice, and excited and rejoiced, he called Don Fernando and Cardenio and the curate aside and told them how the matter stood, assuring them that the judge was his brother. The servant had further informed him that he was now going to the Indies with the appointment of judge of the Supreme Court of Mexico, and he had learned, likewise, that the young lady was his daughter, whose mother had died in giving birth to her, and that he was very rich in consequence of the dowry left to him with the daughter. He asked their advice as to what means he should adopt to make himself known, or to ascertain beforehand whether, when he had made himself known, his brother, seeing him so poor, would be ashamed of him, or would receive him with a warm heart. "Leave it to me to find out that," said the curate, "though there is no reason for supposing, Senor Captain, that you will not be kindly received, because the worth and wisdom that your brother's bearing shows him to possess do not make it likely that he will prove haughty or insensible, or that he will not know how to estimate the accidents of fortune at their proper value. Still," said the captain, "I would not make myself known abruptly, but in some indirect way. I have told you already," said the curate, "that I will manage it in a way to satisfy us all." By this time supper was ready, and they all took their seats at the table, except the captive and the ladies, who supped by themselves in their own room. In the middle of supper the curate said, "I had a comrade of your worship's name, Senor Judge, in Constantinople, where I was a captive for several years, and that same comrade was one of the stoutest soldiers and captains in the whole Spanish infantry, but he had as large a share of misfortune as he had of gallantry and courage." "And how was the captain called, Senor?" asked the judge. "He was called Ruy Perez de Viedma," replied the curate, "and he was born in a village in the mountains of Leon." And he mentioned a circumstance connected with his father and his brothers which, had it not been told me by so truthful a man as he was, I should have set down as one of those fables the old women tell over the fire in winter. For he said his father had divided his property among his 3 sons and had addressed words of advice to them sounder than any of Cato's. But I can say this much, that the choice he made of going to the wars was attended with such success, that by his gallant conduct and courage, and without any help save his own merit, he rose in a few years to be captain of infantry, and to see himself on the high road and in position to be given the command of a corps before long. but fortune was against him, for where he may have expected her favor he lost it, and with it his liberty, on that glorious day when so many recovered theirs at the battle of Lepanto. I lost mine at the Goletta, and after a variety of adventures we found ourselves comrades at Constantinople. From there he went to Algiers, where he met with one of the most extraordinary adventures that ever befell anyone in the world. Here the curate went on to relate briefly his brother's adventure with Zoraida, to all which the judge gave such an attentive hearing that he never before had been so much of a hearer. The curate, however, only went so far as to describe how the Frenchman plundered those who were in the boat, and the poverty and distress in which his comrade and the fair Moor were left, of whom he said he had not been able to learn what became of them, or whether they had reached Spain or been carried to France by the Frenchmen. The captain, standing a little to one side, was listening to all the curate said and watching every movement of his brother, who, as soon as he perceived the curate had made an end of his story, gave a deep sigh, and said with his eyes full of tears, "Oh, Senor, if you only knew what news you have given me and how it comes home to me, making me show how I feel it with these tears that spring from my eyes in spite of all my worldly wisdom and self-restraint. That brave captain that you speak of is my eldest brother, who, being of a bolder and loftier mind than my other brother or myself, chose the honorable and worthy calling of arms, which was one of the three careers our father proposed to us, as your comrade mentioned in that fable you thought he was telling you. I followed that of letters, in which God and my own exertions have raised me to the position in which you see me. My second brother is in Peru, so wealthy that with what he has sent to my father and to me he has fully repaid the portion he took with him, and has evening furnished my father's hands with the means of gratifying his natural generosity, while I too have been enabled to pursue my studies in a more becoming and creditable fashion, and so to attain my present standing. My father is still alive, though dying with anxiety to hear of his eldest son, and he prays God unceasingly that death may not close his eyes until he has looked upon those of his son. But with regard to him, what surprises me is that, having so much common sense as he had, he should have neglected to give any intelligence about himself, either in his troubles and sufferings, or in his prosperity. For if his father or any of us had known of his condition, he need not have waited for that miracle of the reed to obtain his ransom. But what now disquiets me is the uncertainty whether those Frenchmen may have restored him to liberty, or murdered him to hide the robbery. All this will make me continue my journey, not with the satisfaction in which I began it, but in the deepest melancholy and sadness. Oh dear brother, that I only knew where you are now, and I would hasten to seek you out and deliver you from your sufferings, though it were to cost me suffering myself. Oh, that I could bring news to our old father that you are alive. Evening were you the deepest dungeon of Barbary, for his wealth and my brother's and mine would rescue you from there. O beautiful and generous Zoraida, that I could repay your goodness to a brother, that I could be present at the new birth of your soul, and at your bridal that would give us all such happiness. All this and more the judge uttered with such deep emotion at the news he had received of his brother, that all who heard him shared in it, showing their sympathy with his sorrow. The curate, seeing then how well he had succeeded in carrying out his purpose and the captain's wishes, had no desire to keep them unhappy any longer. So he rose from the table and, going into the room where Zoraida was, he took her by the hand, Lucinda, Dorothea, and the judge's daughter following her. The captain was waiting to see what the curate would do, when the latter, taking him with the other hand, advanced with both of them to where the judge and the other gentlemen were, and said, "Let your tears cease to flow, Senor Judge, and the wish of your heart be gratified as fully as you could desire, for you have before you your worthy brother and your good sister-in-law. He whom you see here is the Captain Vidme, and this is the fair Moor who has been so good to him." The Frenchmen I told you of have reduced them to the state of poverty you see, that you may show the generosity of your kind heart." The captain ran to embrace his brother, who placed both hands on his breast so as to have a good look at him, holding him a little way off, but as soon as he had fully recognized him he clasped him in his arms so closely, shedding such tears of heartfelt joy that most of those present could not but join in them. The words the brothers exchanged, the emotion they showed, can scarcely be imagined, I fancy, much less put down in writing. They told each other in a few words the events of their lives. They showed the true affection of brothers in all its strength. Then the judge embraced Zoraida, putting all he possessed at her disposal. Then he made his daughter embrace her, and the fair Christian and the lovely Moor drew fresh tears from every eye. And there was Don Quixote observing all these strange proceedings attentively without uttering a word, and attributing the whole to chimeras of knight-errantry. Then they agreed that the captain and Zoraida should return with his brother to Seville and send news to his father of his having been delivered and found, so as to enable him to come and be present at the marriage and baptism of Zoraida, for it was impossible for the judge to put off his journey, as he was informed that in a month from that time the fleet was to sail from Seville for New Spain, and to miss the passage would have been a great inconvenience to him. In short, everybody was well pleased and glad at the captive's good fortune, and as now almost 2/3 of the night were past, they resolved to retire to rest for the remainder of it. Don Quixote offered to mount guard over the castle lest they should be attacked by some giant or other malevolent scoundrel, covetous of the great treasure of beauty the castle contained. Those who understood him returned him thanks for this service, and they gave the judge an account of his extraordinary humor, with which he was not a little amused. Sancho Panza alone was fuming at the lateness of the hour for retiring to rest, and he of all was the one that made himself most comfortable, as he stretched himself on the trappings of his ass, which, as will be told farther on, cost him so dear. The ladies then, having retired to their chamber, and the others having disposed themselves with as little discomfort as they could, Don Quixote sallied out of the inn to act as sentinel of the castle as he had promised. It happened, however, that a little before the approach of dawn, a voice so musical and sweet reached the ears of the ladies that it forced them all to listen attentively, but especially Dorothea, who had been awake, and by whose side Dona Clara de Viedma, for so the judge's daughter was called, lay sleeping. No one could imagine who it was that sang so sweetly, and the voice was unaccompanied by any instrument. Chapter Roman 43, where is related the pleasant story of the muleteer, together with other strange things that came to pass in the inn. Ah me, love's mariner am I, on love's deep ocean sailing. I know not where the haven lies, I dare not hope to gain it. One solitary distant star is all I have to guide me, a brighter orb than those of old, that pale in Eurus lighted, and vaguely drifting am I borne. I know not where it leads me, I fix my gaze on it alone, of all beside it heedless, but overcautious prudery, and coyness cold and cruel, when most I need it. These, like clouds, its longed for light refuse me. Bright star, goal of my yearning eyes, as you above me beamest, when you shall hide you from my sight, I'll know that death is near me. The singer had got so far when it struck Dorothea that it was not fair to let Clara miss hearing such a sweet voice, so, shaking her from side to side, she woke her, saying, "Forgive me, child, for waking you, but I do so that you mayest have the pleasure of hearing the best voice you have ever heard, perhaps, in all your life." Clara woke quite drowsy, and not understanding at the moment what Dorothea said, asked her what it was. She repeated what she had said, and Clara became attentive at once, but she had hardly heard 2 lines, as the singer continued, when a strange trembling seized her, as if she were suffering from a severe attack of quartan ague, and throwing her arms round Dorothea she said, "Ah, dear lady of my soul and life, why did you wake me? The greatest kindness fortune could do me now would be to close my eyes and ears so as neither to see or hear that unhappy musician. What are you talking about, child? Said Dorothea. Why, they say this sinner is a muleteer. No, he is the lord of many places, replied Clara, and that one in my heart which he holds so firmly shall never be taken from him, unless he be willing to surrender it. Dorothea was amazed at the ardent language of the girl, for it seemed to be far beyond such experience of life as her tender years gave any promise of. So she said to her, "You speak in such a way that I cannot understand you, Senora Clara. Explain yourself more clearly, and tell me what is this you are saying about hearts and places and this musician whose voice has so moved you? But do not tell me anything now. I do not want to lose the pleasure I get from listening to the singer by giving my attention to your transports, for I perceive he is beginning to sing a new strain and a new air. Let him, in heaven's name," returned Clara, and not to hear him she stopped both ears with her hands, at which Dorothea was again surprised, but turning her attention to the song she found that it ran in this fashion: "Sweet hope, my stay, that onward to the goal of your intent do you make your way, heedless of hindrance or impediment, have you no fear, if at each step you findest death is near. No victory, no joy of triumph does the faint heart know, and blessed is he that a bold front to fortune dares not show, but soul and sense in bondage yields up to indolence. If love his wares do dearly sell, his right must be contest. What gold compares with that whereon his stamp he has impressed? And all men know what costs little that we rate but low. Love resolute knows not the word impossibility, and though my suit be set by endless obstacles I see, yet no despair shall hold me bound to earth while heaven is there." Here the voice ceased and Clara's sobs began afresh, all which excited Dorothea's curiosity to know what could be the cause of singing so sweet and weeping so bitter. So she again asked her what it was she was going to say before. On this Clara, afraid that Lucinda may overhear her, winding her arms tightly round Dorothea, put her mouth so close to her ear that she could speak without fear of being heard by anyone else, and said, "This singer, dear Senora, is the son of a gentleman of Aragon, lord of 2 villages, who lives opposite my father's house at Madrid, and though my father had curtains to the windows of his house in winter, and lattice work in summer, in some way, I know not how, this gentleman, who was pursuing his studies, saw me, whether in church or elsewhere, I cannot tell, and, in fact, fell in love with me, and gave me to know it, from the windows of his house, with so many signs and tears that I was forced to believe him, and evening to love him, without knowing what it was he wanted of me. One of the signs he used to make me was to link one hand in the other, to show me he wished to marry me, and though I should have been glad if that could be, being alone and motherless I knew not whom to open my mind to, and so I left it as it was, showing him no favor, except when my father and his 2 were from home, to raise the curtain or the lattice a little and let him see me plainly, at which he would show such delight that he seemed as if he were going mad. Meanwhile the time for my father's departure arrived, which he became aware of, but not from me, for I had never been able to tell him of it. He fell sick of grief, I believe, and so the day we were going away I could not see him to take farewell of him, were it only with the eyes. But after we had been 2 days on the road, on entering the posada of a village a day's journey from this, I saw him at the inn door in the dress of a muleteer, and so well disguised that if I did not carry his image graven on my heart it would have been impossible for me to recognize him. But I knew him, and I was surprised and glad he watched me, unsuspected by my father, from whom he always hides himself when he crosses my path on the road, or in the posadas where we halt. And as I know what he is, and reflect that, for love of me he makes this journey on foot in all this hardship, I am ready to die of sorrow and where he sets foot there I set my eyes. I know not with what object he has come, or how he could have got away from his father, who loves him beyond measure, having no other heir, and because he deserves it, as you will perceive when you see him. And, moreover, I can tell you, all that he sings is out of his own head, for I have heard them say he is a great scholar and poet, and what is more, every time I see him or hear him sing I tremble all over, and am terrified lest my father should recognize him and come to know of our loves. I have never spoken a word to him in my life, and for all that I love him so that I could not live without him. This, dear Senora, is all I have to tell you about the musician whose voice has delighted you so much, and from it alone you may easily perceive he is no muleteer, but a lord of hearts and towns, as I told you already. Say no more, Donna Clara, said Dorothea at this, at the same time kissing her 1,000 times over. Say no more, I tell you, but wait till day comes, when I trust in God to arrange this affair of yours so that it may have the happy ending such an innocent beginning deserves. Ah, Senora, said Donna Clara, what end can be hoped for when his father is of such lofty position, and so wealthy, that he would think I was not fit to be evening a servant to his son, much less wife. And as to marrying, without the knowledge of my father, I would not do it for all the world. I would not ask anything more than that this youth should go back and leave me, perhaps with not seeing him, and the long distance we shall have to travel. The pain I suffer now may become easier, though I dare say the remedy I propose will do me very little good. I don't know how the devil this has come about, or how this love I have for him got in. I such a young girl, and he such a mere boy, for I truly believe we are both of an age, and I am not 16 yet, for I will be 16 Michaelmas Day next, my father says. Dorothea could not help laughing to hear how like a child Donna Clara spoke. Let us go to sleep now, Senora, said she, for the little of the night that I fancy is left to us. God will soon send us daylight, and we will set all to rights, or it will go hard with me. With this they fell asleep, and deep silence reigned all through the inn. The only persons not asleep were the landlady's daughter and her servant, Maritornes, who, knowing the weak point of Don Quixote's humor, and that he was outside the inn mounting guard in armor and on horseback, resolved, the pair of them, to play some trick upon him, or at any rate, to amuse themselves for a while by listening to his nonsense. As it so happened, there was not a window in the whole inn that looked outwards, except a hole in the wall of a straw loft through which they used to throw out the straw. At this hole the two demi-damsels posted themselves, and observed Don Quixote on his horse, leaning on his pike, and from time to time sending forth such deep and doleful sighs that he seemed to pluck up his soul by the roots with each of them, and they could hear him too, saying in a soft, tender, loving tone, O my lady Dulcinea del Toboso, perfection of all beauty, summit and crown of discretion, treasure house of grace, depositary of virtue, and finally, ideal of all that is good, honorable, and delectable in this world. What is your grace doing now? Are you, perhaps, mindful of your enslaved knight who of his own free will has exposed himself to so great perils, and all to serve you? Give me tidings of her, O luminary of the three faces. Perhaps at this moment, envious of hers, you are regarding her, either as she paces to and fro some gallery of her sumptuous palaces, or leans over some balcony, meditating how, whilst preserving her purity and greatness, she may mitigate the tortures this wretched heart of mine endures for her sake. What glory should recompense my sufferings, what repose my toil, and lastly what death my life, and what reward my services? And you, oh, son, that are now doubtless harnessing your steeds in haste to rise early and come forth to see my lady, when you seized her I entreat of you to salute her on my behalf, but have a care, when you shall see her, and salute her, that you kiss not her face, for I shall be more jealous of you than you were of that light-footed ingrate that made you sweat. and run so on the plains of Thessaly or on the banks of the Peneus, for I do not exactly recollect where it was you didst run on that occasion, in your jealousy and love. Don Quixote had got so far in his pathetic speech when the landlady's daughter began to signal to him, saying, "Senor, come over here, please." At these signals and voice Don Quixote turned his head and saw by the light of the moon, which then was in its full splendor, that someone was calling to him from the hole in the wall, which seemed to him to be a window, and what is more, with a gilt grating, as rich castles, such as he believed the inn to be, ought to have, and it immediately suggested itself to his imagination that, as on the former occasion, the fair damsel, the daughter of the lady of the castle, overcome by love for him, was once more endeavoring to win his affections, and with this idea, not to show himself discourteous or ungrateful, he turned Rocinante's head and approached the hole, and as he perceived the two wenches he said, "I pity you, beauteous lady, that you should have directed your thoughts of love to a quarter from where it is impossible that such a return can be made to you as is due to your great merit and gentle birth, for which you must not blame this unhappy knight-errant whom love renders incapable of submission to any other than her whom, the first moment his eyes beheld her, he made absolute mistress of his soul. Forgive me, noble lady, and retire to your apartment, and do not, by any further declaration of your passion, compel me to show myself more ungrateful. And if, of the love you bear me, you should find that there is anything else in my power where I can gratify you, provided it be not love itself demanded of me, for I swear to you by that sweet absent enemy of mine to grant it this instant, though it be that you require of me a lock of Medusa's hair, which was all snakes, or evening the very beams of the sun, shut up in a vial." "My mistress wants nothing of that sort, Sir Knight," said Meritornes at this. "What then, discreet dame, is it that your mistress wants?" replied Don Quixote. "Only one of your fair hands," said Meritornes, "to enable her to vent over it the great passion which has brought her to this loophole, so much to the risk of her honor, for if the lord her father had heard her, the least slice he would cut off her would be her ear." "I should like to see that tried," said Don Quixote, "but he had better beware of that, if he does not want to meet the most disastrous end that ever father in the world met for having laid hands on the tender limbs of a love-stricken daughter." Meritornes felt sure that Don Quixote would present the hand she had asked, and making up her mind what to do, she got down from the hole and went into the stable, where she took the halter of Sancho Panza's ass and in all haste returned to the hole, just as Don Quixote had planted himself standing on Rocinante's saddle in order to reach the grated window where he supposed the lovelorn damsel to be, and giving her his hand, he said, "Lady, take this hand, or rather this scourge of the evildoers of the earth. Take, I say, this hand which no other hand of woman has ever touched, not even hers who has complete possession of my entire body. I present it to you, not that you may kiss it, but that you may observe the contexture of the sinews, the close network of the muscles, the breadth and capacity of the veins, from where you may infer what must be the strength of the arm that has such a hand." "That we shall see soon," said Meritornes, and making a running knot on the halter, she passed it over his wrist and coming down from the hole, tied the other end very firmly to the bolt of the door of the straw loft. Don Quixote, feeling the roughness of the rope on his wrist, exclaimed, "Your grace seems to be grating rather than caressing my hand. Treat it not so harshly, for it is not to blame for the offense my resolution has given you, nor is it just to wreak all your vengeance on so small a part. Remember that one who loves so well should not revenge herself so cruelly." But there was nobody now to listen to these words of Don Quixote's, for as soon as Meritornes had tied him, she and the other made off, ready to die with laughing, leaving him fastened in such a way that it was impossible for him to release himself. He was, as has been said, standing on Rocinante, with his arm passed through the hole and his wrist tied to the bolt of the door, and in mighty fear and dread of being left hanging by the arm if Rocinante were to stir one side or the other. So he did not dare to make the least movement, although from the patience and imperturbable disposition of Rocinante, he had good reason to expect that he would stand without budging for a whole century. Finding himself fast, then, and that the ladies had retired, he began to fancy that all this was done by enchantment, as on the former occasion when in that same castle that enchanted more of a carrier had belabored him, and he cursed in his heart his own want of sense and judgment in venturing to enter the castle again, after having come off so badly the first time, it being a settled point with knights-errant that when they have tried an adventure and have not succeeded in it, it is a sign that it is not reserved for them, but for others, and that therefore they need not try it again. Nevertheless he pulled his arm to see if he could release himself, but it had been made so fast that all his efforts were in vain. It is true he pulled it gently lest Rocinante should move, but try as he may to seat himself in the saddle, he had nothing for it but to stand upright or pull his hand off. Then it was he wished for the sword of Amadis, against which no enchantment whatever had any power. Then he cursed his ill fortune. Then he magnified the loss the world would sustain by his absence while he remained there enchanted, for that he believed he was beyond all doubt. Then he once more took to thinking of his beloved Dulcinea del Toboso. Then he called to his worthy squire Sancho Panza, who, buried in sleep and stretched upon the pack-saddle of his ass, was oblivious at that moment of the mother that bore him. Then he called upon the sages Lurgandeo and Ulquife to come to his aid. Then he invoked his good friend Urganda to succor him, and then, at last, morning found him in such a state of desperation and perplexity that he was bellowing like a bull, for he had no hope that day would bring any relief to his suffering, which he believed would last forever, inasmuch as he was enchanted. And of this he was convinced by seeing that Rocinante never stirred, much or little, and he felt persuaded that he and his horse were to remain in this state, without eating or drinking or sleeping, until the malign influence of the stars was overpast, or until some other more sage enchanter should disenchant him. But he was very much deceived in this conclusion, for daylight had hardly begun to appear when there came up to the inn 4 men on horseback, well equipped and accoutred, with firelocks across their saddle bows. They called out and knocked loudly at the gate of the inn, which was still shut, on seeing which Don Quixote, evening there where he was, did not forget to act as sentinel, and said in a loud and imperious tone, Knights, or squires, or whatever ye be, ye have no right to knock at the gates of this castle, for it is plain enough that they who are within are either asleep, or else are not in the habit of throwing open the fortress until the sun's rays are spread over the whole surface of the earth. Withdraw to a distance, and wait till it is broad daylight, and then we shall see whether it will be proper or not to open to you. What the devil fortress or castle is this, said one, to make us stand on such ceremony? If you are the innkeeper, bid them open to us. We are travelers who only want to feed our horses and go on, for we are in haste. Do you think, gentlemen, that I look like an innkeeper? Said Don Quixote. I don't know what you look like, replied the other, but I know that you are talking nonsense when you call this inn a castle. A castle it is, returned Don Quixote, no more, one of the best in this whole province, and it has within it people who have had the sceptre in the hand and the crown on the head. It would be better if it were the other way, said the traveller, the sceptre on the head and the crown in the hand. But if so, may be there is, within some company of players, with whom it is a common thing to have those crowns and sceptres you speak of, for in such a small inn as this, and where such silence is kept, I do not believe any people entitled to crowns and sceptres can have taken up their quarters. You know but little of the world, returned Don Quixote, since you are ignorant of what commonly occurs in knight-errantry. But the comrades of the spokesman, growing weary of the dialogue with Don Quixote, renewed their knocks with great vehemence, so much so that the host, and not only he but everybody in the inn, awoke, and he got up to ask who knocked. It happened at this moment that one of the horses of the four who were seeking admittance went to smell Rocinante, who melancholy, dejected, and with drooping ears stood motionless, supporting his sorely stretched master, and as he was after all flesh, though he looked as if he were made of wood, he could not help giving way, and in return smelling the one who had come to offer him attentions. Chapter Roman 44, in which are continued the unheard of adventures of the inn. So loud, in fact, were the shouts of Don Quixote, that the landlord, opening the gate of the inn in all haste, came out in dismay and ran to see who was uttering such cries, and those who were outside joined him. Maritornes, who had been by this time roused up by the same outcry, suspecting what it was, ran to the loft and, without anyone seeing her, untied the halter by which Don Quixote was suspended, and down he came to the ground in the sight of the landlord and the travelers, who, approaching, asked him what was the matter with him that he shouted so. He, without replying a word, took the rope off his wrist, and rising to his feet leaped upon Rocinante, braced his buckler on his arm, put his lance in rest, and making a considerable circuit of the plain came back at a half-gallop, exclaiming, "Whoever shall say that I have been enchanted with just cause, provided my lady the Princess Micomicona grants me permission to do so, I give him the lie, challenge him and defy him to single combat." The newly arrived travelers were amazed at the words of Don Quixote, but the landlord removed their surprise by telling them who he was and not to mind him as he was out of his senses. They then asked the landlord if, by any chance, a youth of about 15 years of age had come to that inn, one dressed like a muleteer, and of such and such an appearance, describing that of Dona Clara's lover. The landlord replied that there were so many people in the inn he had not noticed the person they were inquiring for, but one of them observing the coach in which the judge had come, said, "He is here no doubt, for this is the coach he is following. Let one of us stay at the gate, and the rest go in to look for him, or truly it would be as well if one of us went round the inn, lest he should escape over the wall of the yard." "So be it," said another, and, while two of them went in, one remained at the gate and the other made the circuit of the inn, observing all which, the landlord was unable to conjecture for what reason they were taking all these precautions, though he understood they were looking for the youth whose description they had given him. It was by this time broad daylight, and for that reason, as well as in consequence of the noise Don Quixote had made, everybody was awake and up, but particularly Dona Clara and Dorothea, for they had been able to sleep but badly that night, the one from agitation at having her lover so near her, the other from curiosity to see him. Don Quixote, when he saw that not one of the four travelers took any notice of him or replied to his challenge, was furious and ready to die with indignation and wrath. And if he could have found in the ordinances of chivalry that it was lawful for a knight-errant to undertake or engage in another enterprise, when he had plighted his word and faith not to involve himself in any, until he had made an end of the one to which he was pledged, he would have attacked the whole of them, and would have made them return and answer in spite of themselves. But considering that it would not become him, nor be right, to begin any new emprise until he had established Micomicona in her kingdom, he was constrained to hold his peace and wait quietly to see what would be the upshot of the proceedings of those same travelers, one of whom found the youth they were seeking lying asleep by the side of a muleteer, without a thought of anyone coming in search of him, much less finding him. The man laid hold of him by the arm, saying, "It becomes you well truly, Senor Don Luis, to be in the dress you wear, and well the bed in which I find you agrees with the luxury in which your mother reared you." The youth rubbed his sleepy eyes and stared for a while at him who held him, but soon recognized him as one of his father's servants, at which he was so taken aback that for some time he could not find or utter a word, while the servant went on to say, "There is nothing for it now, Senor Don Luis, but to submit quietly and return home, unless it is your wish that my lord, your father, should take his departure for the other world, for nothing else can be the consequence of the grief he is in at your absence." "But how did my father know that I had gone this road and in this dress?" said Don Luis. "It was a student to whom you confided your intentions," answered the servant, "that disclosed them, touched with pity at the distress he saw your father suffer on missing you. He therefore dispatched 4 of his servants in quest of you, and here we all are at your service, better pleased than you can imagine that we shall return so soon and be able to restore you to those eyes that so yearn for you." "That shall be as I please, or as heaven orders," returned Don Luis. "What can you please or heaven order," said the other, "except to agree to go back? Anything else is impossible." All this conversation between the two was overheard by the muleteer at whose side Don Luis lay, and rising, he went to report what had taken place to Don Fernando, Cardenio, and the others, who had by this time dressed themselves, and told them how the man had addressed the youth as Don, and what words had passed, and how he wanted him to return to his father, which the youth was unwilling to do. With this and what they already knew of the rare voice that heaven had bestowed upon him, they all felt very anxious to know more particularly who he was, and evening to help him if it was attempted to employ force against him. So they hastened to where he was still talking and arguing with his servant. Dorothea at this instant came out of her room, followed by Dona Clara, all in a tremor, and calling Cardenio aside, she told him in a few words the story of the musician and Dona Clara, and he at the same time told her what had happened, how his father's servants had come in search of him. But in telling her so, he did not speak low enough, but that Dona Clara heard what he said, at which she was so much agitated that had not Dorothea hastened to support her she would have fallen to the ground. Cardenio then bade Dorothea return to her room, as he would endeavor to make the whole matter right, and they did as he desired. All the 4 who had come in quest of Don Luis had now come into the inn and surrounded him, urging him to return and console his father at once and without a moment's delay. He replied that he could not do so on any account until he had concluded some business in which his life, honor, and heart were at stake. The servants pressed him, saying that most certainly they would not return without him, and that they would take him away whether he liked it or not. "You shall not do that," replied Don Luis, "unless you take me dead, though however you take me, it will be without life." By this time most of those in the inn had been attracted by the dispute, but particularly Cardenio, Don Fernando, his companions, the judge, the curate, the barber, and Don Quixote, for he now considered there was no necessity for mounting guard over the castle any longer. Cardenio, being already acquainted with the young man's story, asked the men who wanted to take him away what object they had in seeking to carry off this youth against his will. "Our object," said one of the 4, "is to save the life of his father, who is in danger of losing it through this gentleman's disappearance." Upon this Don Luis exclaimed, "There is no need to make my affairs public. Here I am free, and I will return if I please, and if not, none of you shall compel me." "Reason will compel your worship," said the man, "and if it has no power over you, it has power over us, to make us do what we came for, and what it is our duty to do." "Let us hear what the whole affair is about," said the judge at this, but the man, who knew him as a neighbor of theirs, replied, "Do you not know this gentleman, Senor Judge? He is the son of your neighbor, who has run away from his father's house in a dress so unbecoming his rank, as your worship may perceive." The judge on this looked at him more carefully and recognized him, and, embracing him, said, "What folly is this, Senor Don Luis, or what can have been the cause that could have induced you to come here in this way, and in this dress? which so ill becomes your condition?" Tears came into the eyes of the young man, and he was unable to utter a word in reply to the judge, who told the 4 servants not to be uneasy, for all would be satisfactorily settled. And then taking Don Luis by the hand, he drew him aside and asked the reason of his having come there. But while he was questioning him, they heard a loud outcry at the gate of the inn, the cause of which was that 2 of the guests who had passed the night there, seeing everybody busy about finding out what it was the 4 men wanted, had conceived the idea of going off without paying what they owed. But the landlord, who minded his own affairs more than other people's, caught them going out of the gate and demanded his reckoning, abusing them for their dishonesty with such language that he drove them to reply with their fists, and so they began to lay on him in such a style that the poor man was forced to cry out and call for help. The landlady and her daughter could see no one more free to give aid than Don Quixote, and to him the daughter said, "Sir Knight, by the virtue God has given you, help my poor father, for 2 wicked men are beating him to a mummy." To which Don Quixote very deliberately and phlegmatically replied, "Fair damsel, at the present moment your request is inopportune, for I am debarred from involving myself in any adventure until I have brought to a happy conclusion one to which my word has pledged me. But that which I can do for you is what I will now mention. Run and tell your father to stand his ground as well as he can in this battle, and on no account to allow himself to be vanquished, while I go and request permission of the Princess Micomicona to enable me to succor him in his distress, and if she grants it, rest assured I will relieve him from it." "Sinner that I am," exclaimed Maritornes, who stood by, "before you have got your permission my master will be in the other world." "Give me leave, Senora, to obtain the permission I speak of," returned Don Quixote, "and if I get it, it will matter very little if he is in the other world, for I will rescue him from there in spite of all the same world can do, or at any rate I will give you such a revenge over those who shall have sent him there that you will be more than moderately satisfied." And without saying anything more he went and knelt before Dorothea, requesting her highness in knightly and errant phrase to be pleased to grant him permission to aid and succor the castellan of that castle, who now stood in grievous jeopardy. The princess granted it graciously, and he at once, bracing his buckler on his arm and drawing his sword, hastened to the inn gate, where the 2 guests were still handling the landlord roughly. But as soon as he reached the spot he stopped short and stood still, though Maritornes and the landlady asked him why he hesitated to help their master and husband. "I hesitate," said Don Quixote, "because it is not lawful for me to draw sword against persons of squirely condition, but call my squire Sancho to me, for this defense and vengeance are his affair and business." Thus matters stood at the inn gate, where there was a very lively exchange of fisticuffs and punches, to the sore damage of the landlord, and to the wrath of Maritornes, the landlady, and her daughter, who were furious when they saw the pusillanimity of Don Quixote, and the hard treatment their master, husband, and father was undergoing. "But let us leave him there, for he will surely find someone to help him, and if not, let him suffer and hold his tongue who attempts more than his strength allows him to do, and let us go back 50 paces to see what Don Luis said in reply to the judge, whom we left questioning him privately as to his reasons for coming on foot and so meanly dressed. To which the youth, pressing his hand in a way that showed his heart was troubled by some great sorrow and shedding a flood of tears, made answer, "Senor, I have no more to tell you than that from the moment when, through heaven's will and our being near neighbors, I first saw Dona Clara, your daughter, and my lady, from that instant I made her the mistress of my will, and if yours, my true lord and father, offers no impediment, this very day she shall become my wife. For her I left my father's house, and for her I assumed this disguise, to follow her whithersoever she may go, as the arrow seeks its mark or the sailor the pole star. She knows nothing more of my passion than what she may have learned from having sometimes seen from a distance that my eyes were filled with tears. You know already, Senor, the wealth and noble birth of my parents, and that I am their sole heir. If this be a sufficient inducement for you to venture to make me completely happy, accept me at once as your son, for if my father, influenced by other objects of his own, should disapprove of this happiness I have sought for myself, time has more power to alter and change things than human will. With this the love-smitten youth was silent, while the judge, after hearing him, was astonished, perplexed, and surprised, as well at the manner and intelligence with which Don Luis had confessed the secret of his heart, as at the position in which he found himself, not knowing what course to take in a matter so sudden and unexpected. All the answer, therefore, he gave him was to bid him to make his mind easy for the present and arrange with his servants not to take him back that day, so that there may be time to consider what was best for all parties. Don Luis kissed his hands by force, no, bathed them with his tears in a way that would have touched a heart of marble, not to say that of the judge, who, as a shrewd man, had already perceived how advantageous the marriage would be to his daughter, though, were it possible, he would have preferred that it should be brought about with the consent of the father of Don Luis, who he knew looked for a title for his son. The guests had by this time made peace with the landlord, for, by persuasion and Don Quixote's fair words more than by threats, they had paid him what he demanded, and the servants of Don Luis were waiting for the end of the conversation with the judge and their master's decision, when the devil, who never sleeps, contrived that the barber from whom Don Quixote had taken Mambrino's helmet and Sancho Panza the trappings of his ass in exchange for those of his own, should at this instant enter the inn, which said barber, as he led his ass to the stable, observed, Sancho Panza engaged in repairing something or other belonging to the pack saddle, and the moment he saw it he knew it, and made bold to attack Sancho, exclaiming, Ho, sir thief, I have caught you. Hand over my basin, and my pack saddle, and all my trappings that you robbed me of. Sancho, finding himself so unexpectedly assailed, and hearing the abuse poured upon him, seized the pack saddle with one hand, and with the other gave the barber a cuff that bathed his Tess in blood. The barber, however, was not so ready to relinquish the prize he had made in the pack saddle. On the contrary, he raised such an outcry that everyone in the inn came running to know what the noise and quarrel meant. Here, in the name of the king and justice, he cried, this thief and highwayman wants to kill me for trying to recover my property. You lie, said Sancho, I am no highwayman. It was in fair war my master Don Quixote won these spoils. Don Quixote was standing by at the time, highly pleased to see his squire's stoutness, both offensive and defensive, and from that time forth he reckoned him a man of mettle, and in his heart resolved to dub him a knight on the first opportunity that presented itself, feeling sure that the order of chivalry would be fittingly bestowed upon him. In the course of the altercation, among other things, the barber said, Gentlemen, this pack saddle is mine as surely as I owe God a death, and I know it as well as if I had given birth to it, and here is my ass in the stable who will not let me lie. Only try it, and if it does not fit him like a glove, call me a rascal. And what is more, the same day I was robbed of this, they robbed me likewise of a new brass basin, never yet handsold, that would fetch a crown any day. At this Don Quixote could not keep himself from answering, and interposing between the two, and separating them, he placed the pack saddle on the ground to lie there in sight until the truth was established, and said, Your worships may perceive clearly and plainly the error under which this worthy squire lies when he calls a basin which was, is, and shall be the helmet of Mambrino, which I won from him in air, war, and made myself master of by legitimate and lawful possession. With the pack saddle I do not concern myself, but I may tell you on that head that my squire Sancho asked my permission to strip off the caparison of this vanquished poltroon's steed, and with it adorn his own. I allowed him, and he took it. And as to its having been changed from a caparison into a pack saddle, I can give no explanation except the usual one, that such transformations will take place in adventures of chivalry. Chapter Roman 45, in which the doubtful question of Mambrino's helmet and the pack saddle is finally settled, with other adventures that occurred in truth and earnest. What do you think now, gentlemen, said the barber, of what these gentles say when they want to make out that this is a helmet? And whoever says the contrary, said Don Quixote, I will let him know he lies if he is a knight, and if he is a squire that he lies again 1,000 times. Our own barber, who was present at all this, and understood Don Quixote's humor so thoroughly, took it into his head to back up his delusion and carry on the joke for the general amusement. So addressing the other barber, he said, Senor Barber, or whatever you are, you must know that I belong to your profession too, and have had a license to practice for more than 20 years, and I know the implements of the barber craft, every one of them, perfectly well. And I was likewise a soldier for some time in the days of my youth, and I know also what a helmet is, and a morion, and a headpiece, with a visor, and other things pertaining to soldiering. I meant to say, to soldiers' arms, and I say saving better opinions and always with submission to sounder judgments, that this piece we have now before us, which this worthy gentleman has in his hands, not only is no barber's basin, but is as far from being one as white is from black, and truth from falsehood. I say, moreover, that this, although it is a helmet, is not a complete helmet. Certainly not, said Don Quixote, for half of it is wanting, that is to say the beaver. It is quite true, said the curate, who saw the object of his friend the barber, and Cardenio. Don Fernando and his companions agreed with him, and evening the judge, if his thoughts had not been so full of Don Luis's affair, would have helped to carry on the joke, but he was so taken up with the serious matters he had on his mind that he paid little or no attention to these facetious proceedings. God bless me, exclaimed there but the barber at this. Is it possible that such an honorable company can say that this is not a basin but a helmet? Why, this is a thing that would astonish a whole university, however wise it may be. That will do. If this basin is a helmet, why, then the pack saddle must be a horse's caparison, as this gentleman has said. To me it looks like a pack saddle, said Don Quixote, but I have already said that with that question I do not concern myself. As to whether it be pack saddle or caparison, said the curate, it is only for Senor Don Quixote to say, for in these matters of chivalry all these gentlemen, and I bow to his authority. By God, gentlemen, said Don Quixote, so many strange things have happened to me in this castle on the 2 occasions on which I have sojourned in it, that I will not venture to assert anything positively in reply to any question touching anything it contains, for it is my belief that everything that goes on within it goes by enchantment. The first time an enchanted moor that there is in it gave me sore trouble, nor did Sancho fare well among certain followers of his, and last night I was kept hanging by this arm for nearly 2 hours, without knowing how or why I came by such a mishap, so that now, for me to come forward to give an opinion in such a puzzling matter would be to risk a rash decision. As regards the assertion that this is a basin and not a helmet, I have already given an answer, but as to the question whether this is a pack saddle or a caparison, I will not venture to give a positive opinion, but will leave it to your worship's better judgment. Perhaps, as you are not dubbed knights like myself, the enchantments of this place have nothing to do with you, and your faculties are unfettered, and you can see things in this castle as they really and truly are, and not as they appear to me. There can be no question, said Don Fernando on this, but that Senor Don Quixote has spoken very wisely, and that with us rests the decision of this matter, and that we may have sure ground to go on, I will take the votes of the gentlemen in secret and declare the result clearly and fully to those who were in the secret of Don Quixote's humor. All this afforded great amusement, but to those who knew nothing about it, it seemed the greatest nonsense in the world, in particular to the 4 servants of Don Luis, as well as to Don Luis himself, and to 3 other travelers who had by chance come to the inn, and had the appearance of officers of the Holy Brotherhood, as truly they were. But the one who above all was at his wit's end was the barber Basin. There before his very eyes had been turned into Mambrino's helmet, and whose pack saddle he had no doubt whatever was about to become a rich caparison for a horse. All laughed to see Don Fernando going from one to another collecting the votes, and whispering to them to give him their private opinion whether the treasure, over which there had been so much fighting, was a pack saddle or a caparison. But after he had taken the votes of those who knew Don Quixote, he said aloud, "The fact is, my good fellow, that I am tired collecting such a number of opinions, for I find that there is not one of whom I ask what I desire to know, who does not tell me that it is absurd to say that this is the pack saddle of an ass, and not the caparison of a horse, no, of a thoroughbred horse. So you must submit, for, in spite of you and your ass, this is a caparison and no pack saddle, and you have stated and proved your case very badly." "May I never share heaven," said the poor barber, "if your worships are not all mistaken, and may my soul appear before God as that appears to me, a pack saddle and not a caparison. But laws go, I say no more, and truly I am not drunk, for I am fasting, except it be from sin." The simple talk of the barber did not afford less amusement than the absurdities of Don Quixote, who now observed, "There is no more to be done now than for each to take what belongs to him, and to whom God has given it. May St. Peter add his blessing." But said one of the 4 servants, "Unless, truly, this is a deliberate joke, I cannot bring myself to believe that men so intelligent as those present are, or seem to be, can venture to declare and assert that this is not a basin, and that not a pack saddle. But as I perceive that they do assert and declare it, I can only come to the conclusion that there is some mystery in this persistence in what is so opposed to the evidence of experience and truth itself. For I swear by," and here he rapped out a round oath, "all the people in the world will not make me believe that this is not a barber's basin and that a jackass's pack saddle." "It may easily be a she-ass's," observed the curate. "It is all the same," said the servant. "That is not the point, but whether it is or is not a pack saddle, as your worships say." On hearing this, one of the newly arrived officers of the Brotherhood, who had been listening to the dispute and controversy, unable to restrain his anger and impatience, exclaimed, "It is a pack saddle as sure as my father is my father, and whoever has said or will say anything else must be drunk." "You lie like a rascally clown," returned Don Quixote, and lifting his pike, which he had never let out of his hand, he delivered such a blow at his head that, had not the officer dodged it, it would have stretched him at full length. The pike was shivered in pieces against the ground, and the rest of the officers, seeing their comrade assaulted, raised a shout, calling for help for the Holy Brotherhood. The landlord, who was of the fraternity, ran at once to fetch his staff of office and his sword, and ranged himself on the side of his comrades. The servants of Don Luis clustered round him, lest he should escape from them in the confusion. The barber, seeing the house turned upside down, once more laid hold of his pack saddle, and Sancho did the same. Don Quixote drew his sword and charged the officers. Don Luis cried out to his servants to leave him alone and go and help Don Quixote and Cardenio and Don Fernando, who were supporting him. The curate was shouting at the top of his voice. The landlady was screaming. Her daughter was wailing. Maritornes was weeping. Dorothea was aghast. Lucinda terror-stricken, and Dona Clara in a faint. The barber cudgeled Sancho, and Sancho pommeled the barber. Don Luis gave one of his servants, who ventured to catch him by the arm to keep him from escaping, a cuff that bathed his tests in blood. The judge took his part. Don Fernando had got one of the officers down and was belaboring him heartily. The landlord raised his voice again, calling for help for the Holy Brotherhood, so that the whole inn was nothing but cries, shouts, shrieks, confusion, terror, dismay, mishaps, sword guts, fisticuffs, cudgellings, kicks, and bloodshed. And in the amid of all this chaos, complication, and general entanglement, Don Quixote took it into his head that he had been plunged into the thick of the discord of Agramonte's camp, and in a voice that shook the inn like thunder, he cried out, "Hold all, let all sheathe their swords, let all be calm and attend to me, as they value their lives." All paused at his mighty voice, and he went on to say, "Did I not tell you, sirs, that this castle was enchanted, and that a legion or so of devils dwelt in it, in proof of which I call upon you to behold with your own eyes how the discord of Agramonte's camp has come here, and been transferred into the amid of us. See how they fight, there for the sword, here for the horse, on that side for the eagle, on this for the helmet. We are all fighting, and all at cross purposes. Come then, you, Senor Judge, and you, Senor Curate, let the one represent King Agramonte, and the other King Sobrino, and make peace among us, for by God Almighty, it is a sorry business that so many persons of quality as we are should slay one another for such trifling cause." The officers, who did not understand Don Quixote's mode of speaking, and found themselves roughly handled by Don Fernando, Cardenio, and their companions, were not to be appeased. The barber was, however, for both his beard and his pack saddle were the worse for the struggle. Sancho, like a good servant, obeyed the slightest word of his master, while the 4 servants of Don Luis kept quiet when they saw how little they gained by not being so. The landlord alone insisted upon it that they must punish the insolence of this madman, who at every turn raised a disturbance in the inn. But at length the uproar was stilled for the present. The pack saddle remained a caparous until the day of judgment, and the basin a helmet, and the inn a castle in Don Quixote's imagination. All having been now pacified and made friends by the persuasion of the judge and the curate, the servants of Don Luis began again to urge him to return with them at once, and while he was discussing the matter with them, the judge took counsel with Don Fernando, Cardenio, and the curate as to what he ought to do in the case, telling them how it stood and what Don Luis had said to him. It was agreed at length that Don Fernando should tell the servants of Don Luis who he was, and that it was his desire that Don Luis should accompany him to Andalusia, where he would receive from the Marquis his brother the welcome his quality entitled him to, for otherwise it was easy to see from the determination of Don Luis that he would not return to his father at present, though they tore him to pieces. On learning the rank of Don Fernando and the resolution of Don Luis, the 4 then settled it between themselves that 3 of them should return to tell his father how matters stood, and that the other should remain to wait upon Don Luis, and not leave him until they came back for him, or his father's orders were known. Thus, by the authority of Agramonte and the wisdom of King Sobrino, all this complication of disputes was arranged. But the enemy of concord and hater of peace, feeling himself slighted and made a fool of, and seeing how little he had gained after having involved them all in such an elaborate entanglement, resolved to try his hand once more by stirring up fresh quarrels and disturbances. It came about in this wise. The officers were pacified on learning the rank of those with whom they had been engaged, and withdrew from the contest, considering that whatever the result may be they were likely to get the worst of the battle. But one of them, the one who had been thrashed and kicked by Don Fernando, recollected that among some warrants he carried for the arrest of certain delinquents, he had one against Don Quixote, whom the Holy Brotherhood had ordered to be arrested for setting the galley slaves free, as Sancho had, with very good reason, apprehended. Suspecting how it was, then, he wished to satisfy himself as to whether Don Quixote's features corresponded, and taking a parchment out of his bosom he lit upon what he was in search of, and setting himself to read it deliberately, for he was not a quick reader, as he made out each word he fixed his eyes on Don Quixote, and went on, comparing the description in the warrant with his face, and discovered that beyond all doubt he was the person described in it. As soon as he had satisfied himself, folding up the parchment, he took the warrant in his left hand and with his right seized Don Quixote by the collar so tightly that he did not allow him to breathe, and shouted aloud, "Help, for the Holy Brotherhood! And that you may see I demanded in earnest, read this warrant which says this highwayman is to be arrested." The curate took the warrant and saw that what the officer said was true, and that it agreed with Don Quixote's appearance, who, on his part, when he found himself roughly handled by this rascally clown, worked up to the highest pitch of wrath, and all his joints cracking with rage, with both hands seized the officer by the throat with all his might, so that had he not been helped by his comrades he would have yielded up his life before Don Quixote released his hold. The landlord, who had perforce to support his brother officers, ran at once to aid them. The landlady, when she saw her husband engaged in a fresh quarrel, lifted up her voice afresh, and its note was immediately caught up by Maritornes and her daughter, calling upon heaven and all present for help. And Sancho, seeing what was going on, exclaimed, "By the Lord, it is quite true what my master says about the enchantments of this castle, for it is impossible to live an hour in peace in it." Don Fernando parted the officer and Don Quixote, and to their mutual contentment made them relax the grip by which they held, the one the coat collar, the other the throat of his adversary. For all this, however, the officers did not cease to demand their prisoner and call on them to help and deliver him over bound into their power, as was required for the service of the king and of the Holy Brotherhood, on whose behalf they again demanded aid and assistance to effect the capture of this robber and footpad of the highways. Don Quixote smiled when he heard these words, and said very calmly, "Come, now, base, ill-born brood, call ye it highway robbery to give freedom to those in bondage, to release the captives, to succor the miserable, to raise up the fallen, to relieve the needy, infamous beings who by your vile groveling intellects deserve that heaven should not make known to you the virtue that lies in knight-errantry, or show you the sin and ignorance in which ye lie when ye refuse to respect the shadow, not to say the presence of any knight-errant. Come now, band, not of officers, but of thieves, footbeds with the license of the Holy Brotherhood, tell me who was the ignoramus who signed a warrant of arrest against such a knight as I am? Who was he that did not know that knights-errant are independent of all jurisdictions, that their law is their sword, their charter their prowess, and their edicts their will? Who, I say again, was the fool that knows not that there are no letters patent of nobility that confer such privileges or exemptions as a knight-errant acquires the day he is dubbed a knight, and devotes himself to the arduous calling of chivalry? What knight-errant ever paid poll tax, duty, queen's pin money, king's dues, toll or ferry? What tailor ever took payment of him for making his clothes? What castellan that received him in his castle ever made him pay his shot? What king did not seat him at his table? What damsel was not enamored of him and did not yield herself up wholly to his will and pleasure?